The battle is lost. The roar of lightning sounded among the dark purple sky, the fall of a high tower. At the moment when they said this, at the moment when this actually happened, words were spoken that no one dared to utter. The swords of the battle were stained with blood. The battle is lost. Many people could not stop staring at the collapsing building. One of the warriors turned to leave. He was ashamed because they had lost. It was all over anyway. The cane furiously stuck into the ground, screaming about how it all ended. Sun Ogong, deprived of his right arm, screamed in complete anger that this was not the end. The man coming to meet him saw and repeated what a victory it is if everything around dies. Hercules, dressed in the skin of a lion, knew that no matter how immortal that armless guy was, he could not behave like that in front of an external god. Standing in front of Sun Ogong, the hero of Olympus understood that this place would soon be discovered. Looking at the blue ball floating in the air, he assumed that perhaps it had already been found. The magic sphere bounced off the ground behind the men arguing with each other. Yuan walked towards them proudly and slowly, dressed in a black suit, chains hanging on his chest. Turning around, the men did not expect to see him. The dark-haired guy sat down on a stone, lowering his head. Everyone was surprised why he was alone. Traces of blood were visible on his face and shirt collar. The warriors, looking at him, could not believe that everyone had died. Yuan, without raising his head, continued to sit in front of the people, admitted that everyone was dead except him. The magic ball fell to the ground, covered in black smoke. Everyone paid attention to him. It was stupid chaos, added the man sitting in grief. Barely holding the hero of Olympus in his arms, Sun Ogong continued to scream furiously. He could not believe that this was one of the external gods. Strongly squeezing his knee, Yuan clearly learned from what happened that they are internal. Rising, looking into the distance, he continued, internal ones cannot defeat external ones. A blue portal opened in the air. A man in a robe stood in front of him with his arm outstretched, saying that they couldn't win just now. Yuan's empty gaze looked at the open portal, and he himself thought about the method of victory. Kronos, with a gear mechanism hovering above his hand, told him to return to the previous world line and start all over again. The winding mechanism of Kronos consisted of small and large gears, in the center of which were the hour hands. This is the only way in which there may not be Kronos, because this is the price for turning back time. Yuan looked at the clockwork mechanism and did not believe that it would disappear as a fact of existence. Bringing the gears closer to the man, Kronos assured him that there would be no difference in his absence or presence. Yuan closed his eyes so as not to cry. It hurt him to lose someone else. Gathering his strength, he stood up because he understood that this was his last chance. All the warriors looked at the brunette. Everyone wanted him to return to the past. Surprised, Yuan still knew the answer, that he would be this traveler. He looked at the fiercely angry Sun Ogong. Because he is also a strong candidate, he was given the answer. The reason was that the man in black entered the tower later than everyone else. Remembering all the howlers, despite this, Yuan was able to adapt to this world faster than anyone else and fight shoulder to shoulder, and also reach the highest floor of the tower before anyone else. A man approached the Chosen One and reminded him that creatures from the upper floors receive restrictions upon entering the lower floors. It was Hercules, who continued his conversation about the tower, because it can only be changed by rising from the bottom. The man in armor, coming up from behind, added that their relationship would not be the same as now. It would be necessary to make sure that they could remember Yuan. Leaning on his cane, Sun Ogong jokingly asked to hit the one who couldn't remember. In parting, the man in black sarcastically thanked him for his good speech and set off on his way. Yuan's hand rose up to touch the mechanism. The gears floating in the air above the palm began to fly chaotically. The man kept only one thought in his head: he will try. The mechanism rang, the hands began to run, and the gears fell to the ground. After a glow of bright light, he saw his hands. He looked and did not understand what was wrong with him. His body was very light, his stats and mana disappeared. Clenching his fists, he didn't understand. They didn't send his body to the past, but turned back time itself. Looking around, he realized that he would have to start all over again. A strong blow from a guy in a school bomber suddenly lands in his face. As a joke, the stranger poked Yuan on the shoulder and found out how he felt. Looking at the guy, the time traveler did not understand what had just happened, but he saw the logo of Chingsal University. Standing in front of him, he remembered how he studied at this university, and the name of the guy who again began to swing his arms to strike. The blonde guy tried to hit again, but the guy in the black jacket and shorts dodged. The bully was surprised by this turn of events. Yuan began to lift up his sleeves and intimidate the guy, asking him what date it was today. The classmate was not ready for defeat and tried to strike again. But the time traveler got ahead of him and struck his opponent's jaw from below. He found the phone. On the screen he saw the time and date. This is 9 hours before he gets into the tutorial. December 31st, 2019, 8 o'clock in the evening in the vicinity of Hongdae. The city glowed from the windows of buildings. There were high-rise buildings and small residential houses. A busy street. The tables of establishments were filled with people relaxing after a working day. The street shone with night lanterns. The guy in the black mask and Panama hat was unhappy with how many people there were. A group of friends sitting at a table called out to the guy. His name was Myung-hoon. He approached the table and immediately picked up a glass of drink. His comrades, in the form of a joke, wrote him a fine for being late in the amount of 50,000 won, to which he responded with rudeness. The guy in the university bomber drank alcohol in one gulp. His friends, who were already having fun, were concerned about his mood, but he asked to pour him more. As the drink poured into his glass, the conversation turned to Yuwon. Myung-hoon was very angry. His bared teeth were visible from under his black mask, remembering how he had attacked him. The guy in the bomber jacket was lying on the floor, wiping blood from his face, and Yuwon was standing over him and talking about how little was left. Thinking through the methods of execution in his head, Myung-hoon lied to his friends, saying that he most likely went to the hospital half dead. Raising their glasses, they continued to mock him and figure out how else to beat him. The clink of glasses rang and the friends began to drink. After some time, one of the guys looked at his wristwatch. It was too late. They stopped on a crowded street. 20,202 was a long holiday weekend. They were planning a third alcoholic session. Steam was coming out of the mouth of the guy in the Panama hat. He wanted to go faster because he was already sober. The sound of the suitcase wheels rolling caught their attention. Isn't it Yuwon? He walked in a black suit, holding his luggage by the handle. The friends' gaze did not leave the guy. They did not expect to see him here. Myung-hoon tore off the mask from his face and decided to approach him, supposedly to say hello. He ran after him, shouting at his back. A group of friends surrounded him, preventing him from passing. The guy in the manama asked what he forgot here. A large number of people passed by the guys, not paying attention. Yuwon raised his watch hand. It's almost 12 o'clock, let's enjoy the remaining 3 minutes to the fullest, and then all hell will break loose, he said, taking off his watch. Myung-hoon, from not understanding what was said, was furious with anger. He went to meet the dark-haired guy while he slowly opened his suitcase. Before he could get there, he opened his mouth in horror, his eyes wide open. Yuwon's luggage contained a small black backpack and a large number of different types of bladed weapons. A group of friends got scared. They pushed the guy away and asked him to apologize. Yuwon, not paying attention to the requests, calmly picked up the axe. He put a backpack on his other hand. He understood that this street in Seoul had the highest turnover of people. The guy quickly walked towards his enemies holding a weapon in his hand. His face was completely calm. Without ceasing to think that everything was beginning, his watch, which was lying on the asphalt, rang exactly 0. People grabbed their heads. They could not understand what was happening. The entire city was enveloped in lightning and purple rays. Yuwon still walked as if nothing was happening past his enemies. Myung-hoon looked at the guy in horror. Why wasn't he in pain? He wondered. District 20,131. Population 12,014 people. The tutorial begins. Survive the zombie invasion. After 30 minutes all creatures will be eliminated. Yuwon went to meet the zombies who had just returned. He could not believe that they were real. Looking through everything in the area, he guessed, because the number of creatures corresponds, this is due to the setting of the difficulty level of the tutorial. The more people in the area, the higher the difficulty level, and then the balance in the area will be maintained. In Hongdae, the density of people is extremely high relative to the streets. A blue screen with small lightning bolts began to be visible near the guy's palm. The area is limited to the escape area, that is, no matter where you go, zombies will be everywhere. In other words, soon all the streets will be flooded with blood. An old knife appeared in his hand. A notification appeared that said that through the system window command you could check your health status. Not paying attention to the chaos happening on the streets, Yuwon looked at what one would hardly call a weapon. Throwing the knife on the ground, the guy reached into the bag that was hanging on his back. He knew that for the old him, having such a weapon would have been enough, but now this is not enough. He took a strange bottle with a red cap from his backpack and opened it with a movement of one finger. Drops of liquid scattered in different directions. Looking into the reflection on the dagger, Yuwon began to swing the weapon, cutting off the heads of the zombies he encountered. For each zombie killed, they were given 100 points and an increase in experience. Blood was pouring everywhere, and the number of corpses was increasing. Yuwon's level was raised. His gaze was purposeful. He felt his body gradually starting to become lighter. I received a notification that the level has been raised. The heads of the next zombies fly off their shoulders. One of them had his throat pierced from behind. The level up notification has reappeared. The hero cut them everywhere with high precision. He was notified that his level had been raised. From the protagonist's blows with a knife, the limbs and body parts of the Walking Dead scattered in different directions, and he again raised his level. Yuwon continued his fierce battle and people gathered around him, and someone nearby called everyone to look at it and asked if these zombies were really not that strong, to which another asked if they should try, and another one screamed that he was going to kill. The man in the vest swung his axe with confidence and shouted. He struck the monster with an axe, but the weapon failed to cause serious damage. The attacker was stunned and asked in horror why it didn't work. A moment later, the walking dead bit him and he screamed loudly. The hero looked at what was happening with a serious look and thought that this was impossible with ordinary forces. Then he continued to cut them into pieces, thinking that, in contrast to the fact that they are slow and weak, they do not know pain and are incredibly tenacious, and besides, their bite is deadly poisonous. The protagonist dealt another blow to the zombies and thought that there were those who barely managed to survive and who were able to rise to high floors, but it was not at all easy. The knife was unable to cut through the flesh and Yuan felt angry inside. He then kneed the creature and wondered if the effect had worn off. While the monster was flying away from the blow, he reached for his pocket and thought that they were far from simple opponents, but they had a weak point. After Mick took his hand out of his pocket in the place with the flask and thought about what it was. Then he cut the flask into 2 parts right in the air with a blade. The protagonist remembered how he was sitting in an unfinished building and next to him on the floor, leaning on a pipe, a blonde-haired man sat and said that, unlike Yuan, he had no talent, and even if compared, not with him, but with other people. Same story, to which he said that the eldest survived anyway. But the interlocutor told him that he was incredibly lucky and he found out an incredible thing in the first tutorial, and then asked if he knew what he was doing before being locked in the damn tower. The man angrily picked up a jar of salt water in his hand and said that he was engaged in salt mining, and then said that the weak point of these zombies was salt. A moment later, the hero was hacking away at the zombies with renewed vigor. He received a notification that he had received a new achievement called an incredible result, which was to kill 100 monsters in 10 minutes in the tutorial. The short-haired man glanced to the side, and another notification came that 3 points of free stats had been received. Afterwards, we learned that free stat points, unlike points for raising a level, which raise stats randomly, can be used to increase the desired stats, and now Mick has 3 of them. But upon completion of the tutorial, free stat points are distributed randomly. Yuan looks at this banner surrounded by corpses and thinks that, as it turns out, free stat points can be obtained in the tutorial. He then pulled his finger towards it and thought about whether he would use them. But then the hero brushed off the sheet with his hand and, as he left, thought that it would be better to save this for later because he couldn't waste his stats just to catch zombies. Afterwards, the protagonist went towards the crowds of zombies, seeing a notification in the sky that he needed to survive the zombie invasion, and there were 10 minutes left, but they would disappear automatically, and then he thought that he should first find a suitable place. But then he had to turn around, because screams were heard from behind and immediately after he clearly said that it would be there. Byung-hoon tried to cut off another zombie's head while screaming, but the weapon did not take them, and he only groaned. The blue-eyed man frowned and thought that it didn't work out for him again, but Yuan easily endured them, and then wondered why it didn't work out for him either. He took his dagger out of the monster and thought about what if he had the weapon that Mick uses. The zombie opened his eyes wide and let out a roar, but he kicked him in the stomach and ordered him to get out. His allies ran up to the man, and the creature flew away a couple of meters. The guy with the bowl haircut looked back in alarm and asked them if it seemed to them that there were not fewer of them, but only more. And the second asked about where Yuan went, because they could survive next to him. The blonde sharply cast his alarmed glance to the side and thought about the hero. Afterwards, he saw a lot of zombies and thought about where Mick had gone. Byung-hoon turned back, as he was called out and told that he had something ahead. He made another blow to the creature. His knife broke and he was terrified and incomprehensible. The zombie stretched his hand towards him and growled, and he thought that he was finished. He covered himself with both hands and stood in front of the monsters who growled and walked straight at him until they crumbled. But then the guys saw this and the blonde asked why they suddenly. But he was interrupted by a man with a bowl cut and asked if something was falling on top. There was a large amount of strange dust in the sky. The blue-eyed man offered his hand. He tasted it and thought it had a salty taste and wondered if it was salt. At this time, another notification came that the level had been raised. The protagonist jumped from one roof to another, receiving these notifications one after another. Then he landed on the roof, braking for a while. A notification came that the first tutorial was completed and the number of survivors was 4077. Yuan looked over his shoulder and thought that a lot had died. While he was looking down at a lot of people and continued to receive notifications that he was being given a reward in proportion to the number of enemies killed, which is equal to 1427. Which means the same number of points, and he also received additional stat points, and his strength was increased by 1, and endurance by 2, and also received 1 free stat point, and he also killed the most enemies, and receives 500 points for this. His face immediately became stone and he exhaled and received another notification about receiving the achievement, an incredible result, and received 1000 points for it. And then he thought that he had killed a lot and wondered how many more notifications there would be. Afterwards, he looked at his status sheet and thought that he had 3000 points in total, and before he started with 10, and this is definitely a huge number for the first tutorial. Afterwards, Yuan threw his bag over his shoulder and received a notification that the second tutorial would begin in a while, which made him think that he was not given a moment's rest. But then something shocked him, because everyone heard an unknown voice greeting them, and at that time the hero was thinking about the next tutorial. The survivors looked up and were perplexed by what to hear, and the voice continued, saying that he congratulated them on their survival and said that there were too many survivors and this was confusing. The protagonist also looked up and aggressively thought that this was a 6, and he continued and said that he needed to convey something to the survivors, because initially this was announced after the completion of the second tutorial. But this time it was an exception. After all, there was a person who reached the threshold too quickly. People stood in panic. A man with a cut on his cheek asked in horror if he would tell them how to get home, and a man with a cut bridge of his nose asked him to be quiet and asked him to listen to him. 6 said that he wanted to inform them about the way to use points. He imagined a lot of different items, weapons and collections, and said that there are 2 main ways to use points, and the first is in the store and perhaps there will be things there that they cannot even imagine. Then he imagined shaking hands with coins surrounding him and said that the other was currency, and asked if they liked money, and then said that they could trade with anyone through a handshake. The hero lowered his hand down and thought that he knew very well that only with the mere presence of points you can become a god. This is not idle chatter, and especially the store plays an extremely important role in this world. The dark-haired man looked over his shoulder and frowned, thinking that from that moment the struggle for level and points began, and at that time a voice said that time was up and asked if their vacation was sweet. A golden sphere began to grow from the very center of the zone, and he continued by saying that the alerts were completed and now it was time for another fight. Everyone received a notification that a safe zone was being created in the center of each district and they needed to reach the safe zone. People started running quickly in one direction, and the next notification was that 100 points were being given out every 3 hours. This was followed by a notification that the second tutorial was starting. Around the crowd there were many multicolored zones radiating from the central purple one. People began to enter the area and questioned whether it was a safe zone. A man with a bowl haircut grabbed Myung-hoon's shoulder as he was holding his face and urged him to go while he asked what the hell was going on. The blonde slowly removed his hand from his face and remained meaningfully silent, while his comrades discussed where Chang-ho had gone, and another said that he did not know and assumed that he had died. They all looked forward with alarm, and the man in the cloak asked the blue-eyed one about what was wrong with him and what he was looking for, and he said that nothing had happened and everything was fine, and the third asked about where Yuan had gone. At this time, the hero slowly walked away from the crowd, while the man in the cloak said that judging by the way he had recently fought, he was some kind of monster, and then asked if he had any predisposition to wielding a dagger. Myung-hoon, who noticed what was happening, quickly followed the protagonist and ordered his people to retreat, and they asked him where he had gone. Then he grabbed the time returner by the shoulder. The blonde turned him towards him and asked where he was going, and said that he didn't need to go there, then asked if he had heard that everyone was told to go in a circle. He smiled brazenly and urged him to go, because the elder must definitely take care of the unlucky younger one, but at this time he was thinking about what he did not want to admit. But now he would be much safer next to him, and if he was the first to extend his hand, then he would definitely. But the hero, without raising his head, calmly said that he knew this. He removed his hand from himself and said that he needed to go somewhere and wished him well to stay. Afterwards, the black-haired man put his hand on his shoulder and calmly said that if he so wants to survive, then he shouldn't curry favor with others and should just sit quietly in the safe zone. Afterwards, the guy brought his eyebrows together and calmly told him that he should do without arrogance. He immediately turned around and aggressively asked what Yuan allowed himself to do. Then he clenched his fist and cursed in his thoughts. Afterwards, he quickly went to the safe zone, and the comrade running behind him hit the wall while he thought about the protagonist failing and wondered whether he would be safer with that goat than in the safe zone. But then the blonde turned around and heard his screams that he was stuck. Although he was told to enter, he thought that he was stuck. And then something caught his eye. Above them was a notice that the limit on the number of people was 2038. He looked at it carefully and thought that this place had a limit of 2,000 people, and then realized that this was exactly half of the survivors, and that meant the remaining ones who could not enter in a circle. Outside the safe zone, human scraps and stones began to fly apart. Blue-eyed looked at this in horror and listened to the screams. Behind the walls, huge worms ate people and destroyed buildings and land while they prayed for salvation. At this time, the dagger plunged into the monster's neck. Yuan killed another monster by swinging his weapon while it screamed in pain. The protagonist looked to the side, and while others were screaming in agony, he thought that it had begun. Afterwards, he slowly went down the stairs and a notification came to him that he had killed an earthworm and he was given 300 points and 2 random stat points. And then a notification came out that his strength had been increased by 1 as well as his agility. The hero looked down seriously and thought that the earthworms were not visible because they were bursting out of the ground. Afterwards, he closed his eyes and thought that if he blocked his vision and focused on other senses. In front of him, he felt massive darkness and heard a quiet rumble. The ground vibrated slightly under his foot. The ground began to tear apart and a worm began to burst out under his foot. He jumped up and hit him on the head, thinking that now was the time. Then the dark-haired man waved his dagger. The one who returned in time was able to kill the next monster, splashing its green blood. But then something caught his attention. A notification came out that his level had been raised, and his strength, agility, and intuition were increased by 1. The ground scattered under his foot and he thought that the level had risen from just 2 creatures. The protagonist went down the stairs and thought that if he tried hard, he could gain a lot of stat points. Having taken another step, he stopped. The dark-haired man looked around. Then the blue-eyed man looked around the corner and thought that earthworms settle underground and dig caves for themselves. He froze, cast a calm look and thought that, in other words, this is the best place to hunt earthworms. In front of him were many worms that filled the subway and a notification came out that a hidden dungeon had been discovered at Hongdae Station and for this he received 100 points. A lot of monsters huddled together in a ball and he thought that this was a wonderful find. Then he twirled the dagger in his hand and thought that when a nest was found, there was nothing difficult left in the hunt. The hero put both daggers in front of him and thought that first he needed to reach the 20th level. Another worm rushed towards him with its mouth open and screaming, but he jumped over their heads with great speed and killed them one by one. Splashes of green blood flew to the sides every now and then. The protagonist was in a state of flow, waving his daggers, but then he saw a sphere falling out of the worm. Afterwards the guy waved his daggers and thought that it was a bead and thought that it turned out that they could be obtained here. After he took it in his hands, he thought that it was amusing, so much so that they seemed charming to him. Raising his hand higher, the blue-eyed man smiled and apologized to them, saying that he had a reason for their extermination. Outside, the worms ate the people one by one as they screamed in agony. People in the safe zone were afraid and huddled. Someone said that it was terrible, and another said that since they were caught anyway, they could die by biting their tongue. Then a notification came out saying that 3 hours had passed and 100 points had been received. People looked at these notifications in alarm and someone asked if it was that someone said that it was like money and that 100 points was a lot. Then a notification came out that the red zone was becoming inactive and the maximum number of people dropped to 1,500. The area began to become smaller and people were perplexed. The next notification was that if the limit is exceeded, people are randomly expelled from the safe zone. The area was slowly shrinking under people's feet and one of them asked how much they planned to reduce it, and the other asked what the hell was happening and thought that his body was being pulled in by itself. Many people from the crowd were thrown over the wall and the counter slowly became smaller. The next thrown out person is about to be eaten by a monster. People begin to run further away from the wall, screaming and shouting, and the counter said that there were almost 3 hours left. A man with black hair hit the young guy in the chest with aggression and told him not to block the road, and then asked him if he wanted to die by his hand. The crowd ran, and its participants fell at the feet of others. Someone shouted that he needed to go inside, and someone asked why they were blocking his way. And then Moonhoon stopped shouting at everyone to shut up. Several people turned to look at him and they remained silent significantly. At this time, the blonde man looked at them with aggression on his face and said that they would now decide who would die in his place. Moonhoon grimaced angrily, shouting that now they will decide who dies in his place. The man clenched his fists, looking at all those who surrounded him, thinking that at this rate he could get out of here. The guy looked into the eyes of the man standing opposite him, who was looking back, and the hero himself was thinking that he could kill him. At that very second, Moonhoon grabbed the man by the collar, thinking that he could survive in this case. Holding a weak man opposite him, who could not do anything against him, the guy looked into his eyes, and everyone around him screamed, not understanding what this madman was doing. The hero's gaze acquired determination. He gritted his teeth and said loudly that he would kill this old man at any cost. At this very time, Yuan held a weapon in his hands, striking the monster. The monster's mouth opened, and at that time the hero cut it into several pieces. He walked decisively towards his goal, quickly moving his feet. The weapon in the guy's hand shone with a bright light as he drew it. Immediately a strong blow fell on the creature's mouth, causing it to become furious, screaming and showing all its teeth. Yuan walked on with his head down, while parts of the monster lay on the ground and nervously swayed, and the guy's level rose due to this. He put all the trophies in his backpack, and the holographic window reported that the guy's agility, endurance, and intuition had been increased by 1 and the hero himself had reached level 20. Having thrown the backpack onto his back, the character was holding an axe in his hands, and the panel announced that a new stat would now open. Wiping his knife with the hand in which he held his blade, the hero closed his eyes and realized that it took him 3 whole hours, during which he was very tired, but due to the increase in stats, his body gained lightness. Looking at the achievements window that popped up, the guy saw all his rewards for hunting earthworms, 3 random stat points and 1 free stat point. Yuan raised his finger to the screen, which asked if the hero wanted to use stat points, of which there were only 5, and the man pressed the positive answer. The hero held his weapon in his hands while he was given free stat points. The man closed his eyes while it was reported that his mana had been increased by 5, and the mana itself was a stat that would become the base for his future powers. Walking away from the room where the corpses of earthworms lay, the hero thought that now there was no stat more important than this, and his mana was exactly 18. The character thought that even the small number of people who received the blessing of the tower had a starting mana of 12 stats, so this was a good start. Walking further with the axe, Yuan looked around, thinking about what was now required of him. His eyes opened wide and, looking upward, he called out to someone. Looking at a wide crack in the ceiling, the guy asked someone what he was looking at. What was in this crevice was silent. After this, a voice was heard addressing the hero, asking how he knew about this. Standing with a weapon in his hands and looking around, the character replied that he was attracting attention, so he immediately understood it. A smile appeared on the man's face and he asked the man if it was really boring to look somewhere else, and the stranger's voice replied that it was so. Some creature began to descend from above, thanking the guy and saying that he added color to her routine work. She opened her mouth in surprise and said, not believing that the hero had already reached the 20th level. It was Lackey. Holding a weapon, Yuan replied to the approaching creature that he was just lucky, but she replied that there are no worse people in the world who speak like that. Spinning on her stone, Lackey looked at the guy, asking the reason for her call, and the hero replied that he wanted to go to the store, and to that she asked him if the character wanted to buy something, but the man replied that this is not what he wants. The clown-like creature grimaced as the hero announced that he wanted to buy a skill. The man stood in front of a huge holographic window while Lackey talked about how he became the first person to buy the skill in the second tutorial. The hero reached for the panel after the creature's words that he could choose what he wanted, and the man thought that there was too much in the store and it would take a lot of time to get to the end. Yuan kept scrolling, looking at all the skills. His face took on a confused look and he asked if this was all the skills that were available, and he was told that this was all that could be obtained from the tutorial. Determination appeared in the character's eyes, and Lackey asked him if he was really looking for something specific, and the hero replied that he was not looking for anything. He thought that he would continue to clarify, but after attracting more attention to himself, because otherwise it would not bode well. Looking at the panel where the skill appeared, the man decided to buy monkey eyes, but the mentor sent by the leader grinned, saying that this was not such a good skill. The panel showed that 2,000 points had been spent. Without looking at his companion, the man replied that this skill had a cool name, and the holographic panel reported that monkey eyes had been obtained. Then the next skill appeared on the panel and the guy spent the remaining 1,500 points on the skill of the lower mana sword. Heading forward, after he had chosen everything that suited him, Lackey fussed around the man, saying that he had made a good choice, because the inferior magic sword made up for the lack of attacking power of the newcomers, but all these explanations irritated Yuan. The creature waved his hand, indicating that he would better leave and wishing him a pleasant time. The hero left, walking forward and listening behind him to the last words of his mentor that she had high hopes for him. The character looked up and, thinking about the words spoken, realized that he would be looked after as if he were an object of special service. Moving his feet quickly, the man walked, thinking that it didn't matter to him whether he was being followed or not, because he got to this place legally, so there was nothing to catch him. Suddenly, the hero, illuminated by 2 different light beams, lowered his head, realizing that his only concern was returning, but he did not know if they could find out about it. Introducing Kronos, who handed him the artifact. Standing near the retinue, the guy thought that the winding watch used for the return was created by this very man, Mimir, Odin, and as a penalty for using the watch, his very existence was erased. The leader looked at him with empty eyes, but the man understood that ordinary examiners and trustees would not be able to find a single clue that would lead them to return. The guy thought about what would happen if someone found out. Belted by yellow smoke after using the monkey eyes skill, which expands vision areas and enhances the 5 senses, the man walked forward with the weapon, knowing that his goal was unchanged. He opened his yellow eyes, looking straight ahead. Walking past the earthworms, Yuan understood that he needed to quickly improve his skill level, because the real value of these eyes lay elsewhere. A terrible thing appeared before the hero, namely how toothy creatures devoured people alive. Suddenly a guy appeared in front of them, standing in the distance and piercing the monsters with his gaze. The panel showed that the guy had less than half an hour left to deal with them. Using an inferior magical sword, the character stood in front of the creatures, looking at them with determination and realizing that there was enough time for this. He spread his hand with a weapon that shone with a bright flame and, standing opposite the heart, said that he thought it would be here. A huge purple creature appeared in front of him, opening its mouth, and the young man realized that this was the boss of the second tutorial, namely the mother of worms. Yuan stomped loudly, causing a powerful sound to be heard. His foot was near the creature's tail and, feeling the rough touch, the mother screamed and got angry. The hero himself looked up at her, listening to her sighs and realizing that she was not like those monsters who devour people. The boss of the second tutorial opened her mouth wide and growled loudly, defending her children, while the guy defended himself from her and understood that the mother had a strong attachment to her children. Looking at the monster's open mouth and eyes that were not looking at him, the hero realized that his mother had the same severe lack of brains. Immediately its mouth closed and many stones flew to the sides. Yuan jumped high, heading towards the boss and pointed his weapon at her. Flying in the air, the character declared that he would kill her instantly. He rushed at her with an axe and sword, pointing the blade at her head. A guy with burning eyes was pointing an axe towards his forehead. As he struck and flew over her legless worm-like body, the hero was pursued by a loud scream and the creature's drooling. He rushed over her torso, cutting it into pieces. The boss of the second tutorial was thrashing and screaming in a fit, while the man struck her with strong blows with his axe and sword. The character's gaze became determined and he looked, smiling and asking what to do next. At that same second, he jumped up, realizing that he needed to turn his mother's body over and knock it over, but she threw the young man up. The man became furious and rushed at her with a sword, saying that this was an extremely bad choice. He quickly moved from every part of her body, waving his weapon. Madness and determination flashed in his eyes, and Yuan embitteredly realized that this was not the end. The creature opened its toothy mouth, screaming loudly and looking at all its wounds that the fighter had inflicted. The man flew forward, cutting his mother into two parts with his sword, which glowed brightly in his hands with a blue flame, and the hero himself understood that there was still a little left. Flying over the boss's head, the young man looked at her. At that very second he rushed into her mouth, which she opened wide. The warrior looked at her decisively, thanking his mother for coming to him for the first time, and a bright fiery light flashed in the guy's eyes. In a matter of seconds, the boss's mouth was split into two parts with one strong and powerful blow from the young man's sword. At this time, someone grabbed Muhun's leg, asking him for help and saying that he shouldn't do this. But the blonde guy pulled out a knife, shouting loudly for the victim to shut his mouth, and at the sight of this the old man recoiled from the young man. The man was horrified, looking at the distraught hero, who echoed that he should observe the limit, because everyone agreed to choose the person who would die in his place. The hero behaved aggressively with the old man, while those around him shouted that no one agreed with this and the guy himself decided to do it, but the fighter adamantly insisted that everyone agreed except them. Anger and despair flashed in his gaze and he, gritting his teeth, pointed the knife towards his rivals, telling them not to even think about approaching him, because he would kill them. As the man walked past a crowd of people, the panel showed that there were only 30 seconds left. Despair and madness appeared in people's eyes when 13 seconds remained. People cried and took cover, seeing earthen monsters in front of them. But in Muhun's eyes there was still a desire to save himself and he stood holding a knife in his hands and looked around. Suddenly something caught the fighter's attention. On the tabla, time stopped at 3 seconds. Everyone looked at the holographic window, realizing that time was not moving any further. The blonde looked again at the window, where it was written that the safe zone would no longer decrease, and the sweat disappeared from the guy's face when he realized that they managed to survive. He suddenly shouted loudly that they had survived. Yuan himself saw how the panel showed that he had received 600 points, and there were only 15 hours left before completing the second tutorial. The hero tucked something into his sleeve, holding a certain jar in his hand, while Lackey admired him, and the character only answered that he tried. Sitting on the defeated boss, the trustee asked the guy whether to heal him and the young man replied that if it was as a reward, then he was forced to refuse, because with the increase in stamina everything would be delayed in an instant. The trustee was hovering around him, asking the guy how an ordinary person could get here in just 2 tutorials, because this is amazing, and turning away and reproaching her for making noise again, the hero was thinking about his own. He opened his eyes and thought that he had killed the mother of the worms 30 minutes ago, although she had appeared later than he had expected. Remembering the boss, the hero understood that the destruction of the mother of worms, which supports the ecosystem of the second tutorial, exceeds the expectations of the 6s who are in charge of the tutorials, and, of course, the reward for destruction has not been established and opinions about this reward varied. Sitting on the dead carcass of the monster, Yuan asked the trustee about the award and he was told that the fact of presenting an award for special achievements is really what he needs, because if so, then the guy managed to understand the structure of this world, and for this the character replied that he had already climbed far and realized this. Spinning on his sphere, Lackey looked at the hero, saying that he knew nothing more about it, but the man's eyes lit up and he again demanded a reward. With a wave of her hand, the trustee agreed. Spinning around opposite the sitting young man, she informed him that he could choose one of 3. Showing all this, she said that the first one would have the right to go to the 5th tutorial and the man received information and a reward for clearing the 3rd and 4th tutorials. Looking at the trustee, Yuan thought that she was using a trick, because now with his level there is no point in this tutorial and they just want to send him to the 5th tutorial prematurely. But Lackey added that the second one is points. The hero's face changed when he asked her what the third was. Opening a hologram of a certain place and standing in front of it, the trustee replied that the third would be a connection with Olympus. The warrior looked at her in amazement and she explained that, most likely, the guy does not know that the tutorial is only the starting point of this world. The staff's gaze became more stern when she informed him that the tower housed countless authorities and beings with power equal to that of a god. The man represented the gods who are afraid, while Lackey said that the guy would be recommended to Olympus, because this is one of the authorities in the tower and if you get their support, then after completing the tutorial the young man will be able to be safe in the tower. Running his fingers over his leg, Yuan began to think that he had not expected this, although he understands that Olympus has enormous power in the tower and Kronos was also one of the rankers from there. Getting up, the young man thought that having it in your hand, he could quickly and safely climb the tower, and suddenly he decided to make a choice in favor of the second option. Proudly stood in front of the trustee, he once again duplicated his choice and thereby stunned her. A notification appeared on the panels indicating that 10,000 points had been received. Lackey waved her hands, saying that she would explain everything before the hero spent his reward. Standing in front of the hero, she explained that she needed to choose wisely, because he clearly still knew little about Olympus and would regret it later, but the hero immediately stopped her. Taking his backpack in his hands, he said that since she was here to carry out instructions, then let her do so, because she did not immediately coordinate this with the other 6, and especially did not talk to the manager, and upon hearing these words, the trustee became alarmed. Lackey stopped him, not believing how the hero spoke about the manager, but the man immediately added that the other 6 also did not receive a similar offer, and was it really only Olympus who bribed her, or could it be heaven? Yuan stood in front of the angry trustee, who was pointing a gun at him in rebellion, but the hero thanked her for her chatty mouth, because now he knew what else he had to do in this place. An offer for a one-on-one meeting with the manager for 1,000 points was displayed on the holographic panels, and the young man pressed the pay button, while Lackey anxiously scurried around him. The man walked down from the boss of the second tutorial, leaving her alone. The guy's gaze became decisive when a notification arrived that the manager had agreed to the meeting, and the young man thought that the tutorial must be separated from the tower, and moreover, the warrior needed to contact Olympus. Opposite the hero, something suddenly shone with a bright light and he thought that he would never deal with him even for the sake of a future goal. Suddenly, someone's leg came out of the portal that appeared and a voice quietly began to talk about organizing this meeting in the tutorial. After that, a bandaged hand appeared and the voice laughed because the meeting cost only 1,000 points. Looking at Yuan, who stood opposite him, the leader asked the guy if he called him and the hero replied that he was a participant in the tutorial. The bearded leader smiled, answering that the fighter had killed more than 1,000 dead people in the first tutorial. A huge man appeared in front of the guy, who said that he had heard about him. Destroyed land, surrounded by dense houses. A creature that looked like a terrifying clown in bloody clothes was surprised by the number of dead people killed in the first tutorial. In front of the dark-haired guy stood the gigantic tutorial manager, who had heard a lot about him. Standing in front of each other, the healthy man did not understand how he knew about the way to request a personal conversation. Yuan, looking from the bottom up, explained that all information about the tutorial should be found out only by the participant himself, without the intervention of the manager or the tower. With his arms crossed, the bearded man continued to listen to the fact that the guy had learned all the information on his own and he was not lying, since the tutorial manager saw through the truth and lies uttered in the area of his responsibility. His red, barely glowing eyes were full of thought. Yuan, continuing to stand motionless in front of the man, added that, on the contrary, the intervention was on his part. Next to the brunette's shoulder, a small creature was still hovering in the air and listening to how Olympus approached the 6s and the guy was offered Olympus support as a reward. Frightened, the clown began to make excuses, looking at the giant's enraged eyes. With all his might, the manager slammed the Olympian's hand onto the ground. Drops of blood hung down his hand. He did not want them to stretch their hands where they were not needed. Shaking off his hand, the man thanked Yuan, who spoke about the second rule of the tutorial. The eyes of the tutorial manager stopped shining with rage and he silently listened to the fact that for all the actions and achievements of a tutorial participant, a reward is awarded depending on his exceptionality. Turning his head away, Yuan admitted how he called the man, spending his well-deserved points in defeating the spoiled 6. The guy in black looked at the man with a thoughtful look and asked about his opinion. The terrifying lower creatures with sharp teeth in their mouths were tested and no abnormalities or features were found. Scratching his thick beard, he was surprised by the inspection that had taken place. Yuan looked only at the manager. The guy, although not with his own hands, was able to kill 6 close to the ranker, who died in the second tutorial. The giant leaned towards the brunette and smiled, his eyes shining red again. He was pleasantly surprised at how the guy managed to eliminate her alone. With a loud roar, the giant sat down on the ground and reasoned, because for an incredible achievement, an honorary reward is due. With a snap of his fingers, the manager began to rattle off the list. Connecting his thumb and middle finger, the man saw that the guy did not need points. Yuan looked at the manager and waited. The giant stood up and extended his hand to the brunette. He came up with something that should be useful to him. The man extended his palm further and offered his hand. Yuan was surprised. He extended his hand in response, thinking about the gesture used when exchanging points. There was nothing special about this reward, but he was hoping for more. After their handshake, an air vortex formed around them and the guy received the Master of Mana skill. He felt the recovery of mana, its resistance and induction power slightly increase, and its amount increased by 5 units. With his eyes wide open, the brunette looked at one point. The tutorial manager, looking at the guy, asked what his reward was. Lightning struck around them. The giant needed to teach the low creatures a lesson. He said goodbye to the guy, but promised to see him when the 3rd tutorial was over. Yuan was left alone in the building with the dead 6. He looked at his hand, from which blue vapor was emanating. From great excitement and shock, a drop of sweat could be seen on his face. He could not believe that S+ rank skills were in the tutorial. Clenching his hand into a fist, Yuan understood that his skill was still at 0, but this was a skill in managing mana. The blue glow began to shine brighter in his hand. He thought about the magical power that is everything in the tower. A moment and a ball of mana formed in front of him. It was chaotically iridescent colors from blue to purple enclosed in the shape of a sphere. His gaze could not tear himself away from his ability. The amount of mana was 26. Continuing to hold his hand, the sphere began to dissipate. Yuan waved his hand, and from this movement the building began to collapse even more. The cracks in the floor became even more pronounced. Clenching his fist, the brunette assessed the instability of the ability, but it was no longer bad, and should he be grateful to Olympus for this? Having gathered his thoughts, the guy understood that this was still not enough, and it was not enough for him to simply repeat the entire path he had traveled and regain the strength of the level before rewinding time. Yuan was surrounded by eyeless creatures with huge fangs. Having run away, he thought that he needed even more cards. The brunette, with a bladed weapon in his hands, attacked a flock of creatures that looked like worms. The time to complete the 2nd tutorial was hours, 10 minutes and 11 seconds. The ruined Hongdi Street, the crowd gathered in the safe zone, was divided into 2 groups. Some hoped to wait, because the authorities would not just leave this collapse, while others were afraid that after the 2nd tutorial a 3rd and 4th would be waiting for them. In a group of people, one guy began to panic. They grabbed him sharply by the t-shirt and held him. It was Mimhoon. He dragged that guy along and told him to gather the next supply group and get out of here. Stopping, he looked at the frightened guy, deciding to cheer him up, because thanks to him, many of those who were destined to die would be able to survive. While Mimhoon hurried the supply team, a man in the crowd noticed something strange in the distance. Among the ruins, a man in black walked along an empty street. The people began to discuss this man until one of them screamed when he saw the danger. Yuan's foot stepped on a moving piece of asphalt, and from the sound a terrible eyeless creature jumped out from under the ground. The creature wanted to attack the guy as he continued to walk, but Yuan got ahead of him, jumping on top and slamming the worm's head onto the ground. The crowd of people standing in the safe zone opened their mouths at what was happening. The time to complete the 2nd tutorial was hours, 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Mimhoon was both shocked and angry. He recognized that brave guy in black. Spattered with green blood, the brunette asked not to pay attention to him and continue talking. A sign has appeared indicating that Yuan's stats have been increased, with the exception of intuition, which has been reduced by 2 units. His foot remained planted on the defeated enemy. He had no intention of lingering, but only to drop in and receive the reward for completion. Wiping his face of green mucus, someone shouted the hero's name. Mimhoon, the same uninvolved person who took on the role of leader, walked towards him. Unusual for both, the red-haired guy grabbed the second one by the shoulder in a friendly manner and began to tell how he lost him and how much time it took to find him. Yuan's eyes did not hide his disbelief, but he continued to listen to what his enemy from the university was worried about when the guy disappeared. He looked at the surprised crowd of people. Above their heads he saw a pop-up window that showed the limit on the number of people in the safe zone. The supply group arrived and was met by an unfriendly man with knives in both hands. The brunette paid attention to the unfriendly greeting, to which Mimhoon asked not to pay attention and dragged him further. A guy in black stopped and expressed dissatisfaction, because people were forcibly thrown out and forced to carry food. The 2 guys started arguing. Waving their arms, Mimhoon tried to justify himself by saying that these people were destined to die, and that's how they benefit each other. Yuan showed with all his appearance that he did not like such a calculation. The university guy, barely able to contain his incredible anger and aggression, began to threaten his friend. pointing to all the people standing in the safe zone. He admitted that one would have to become a coward to survive in this place. Looking at each tired and not exhausted person, he continued about the importance of norms and morality in such a frightening environment. In order to survive, you need to become a tireless and selfish person. Baring his teeth, Mimhoon allowed himself to tease the hero who defeated the eyeless creature whether he was able to adapt to such a reality. Not understanding the caustic joke, the brunette asked his friend again. There are hours, minutes, and seconds left until the end of the second tutorial. A notification arrived saying that the second stage was completed. All participants in the safe zone were given 500 points and new equipment. Yuan, not having a complete desire to understand, waved his hand and said that he was not going to participate in such methods of survival, much less give advice. Turning back a little, he finally said that the university guy should never cross the line. Mimhoon, watching the hero in black leave them, could not understand what trait he was told about. A message has arrived notifying us that the third tutorial has begun. Mimhoon could only look at Yuan's back, but thoughts crept into his head that he was bluffing again. Worm-like creatures crawled across the remaining buildings. It was necessary to hunt monsters in the area and pick up 50 entities, which was given 72 hours. The area was overrun with various types of creatures that looked like zombies, a giant spider and a boar. After time the area would be destroyed. A sign appeared indicating the number of victims. After 70 hours the gate will be activated. The intersection was filled with every possible type of creature. People in the safe zone were worried that monsters had reappeared and there was no end to it. Mimhoon, looking at the creatures, was able to see a certain passage. The idea came into his head to deceive the people so that people would kill frightening creatures for him and he could collect the necessary 50 entities. But an ominous smile appeared on his face and he ordered to do what was ordered. The glass ball fell down. It reflected a pink glow. Yuan, sitting on his knee, began to throw spheres of mana onto the ground. In a hurry, he dropped his backpack and quickly checked his pockets. There were too many monsters. Glancing at everyone he saw, he wondered how much he could collect. Raising his palm up, he checked how much mana he had. The creatures climbed the stairs towards the guy with an unusual skill. Looking at the mana, he reasoned how lucky he was to get the essences from the second tutorial, but it was still not enough. The ball gathered and the concentration of mana was replenished. Notifications announced the completion of mana concentration and registration as a skill. With eyes full of rage, Yuan waved his hand. The blow was so strong that the monsters in front died. Small lightning bolts emanated from his hand and then he realized that everything had worked out. Yuan's hand weakened, he thought, because he spent all his mana on concentration alone, and it was difficult to control, but it is useful when his stats and skill level rise. Sitting down on the steps, the guy sighed. The building suffered serious damage from such a blow. While picking up the balls, he talked to himself about the basic technique of concentrating mana, which determines the scale of mana control, but this was completely out of character for the guy. The monsters fell to the ground and moved slightly, barely surviving the devastating blow. Passing by the corpses, Yuan looked at them and did not understand why they were trembling. Taking a cold weapon in his hand, he was determined to start everything from the very beginning. His knife glowed blue, and his eyes glowed orange. The guy was not going to waste the remaining time. Time left 22 hours, 43 minutes, and 22 seconds. Second day of the third tutorial. A group of 3 guys got lost in the ruins of a building. Han Junho, turning to a friend, tried not to show that he was scared, because in 2 days only 400 remained from 1,400 people. The huge station of the city of Hongdi, which also suffered, they tried to look around and hoped not to see anyone. Juyeon was walking behind the guys and noticed something unusual. Behind a dilapidated pole was a neon sign for a convenience store. The group of people was very happy. One of them, in a red jacket, ran to the store out of impatience. Xiangchen and the girl continued to joyfully look at their cheerful friend. Turning around, Han Junho did not notice the giant monster lurking above his own head. An instant and the creature mercilessly bit off the head of the guy in the red jacket in front of the eyes of his friends. Juyeon covered her mouth in horror. They were all very shocked. His headless body fell to his knees, surrounded by various monsters. Seeing a large number of creatures, they grabbed their weapons. There was fear in the girl's eyes. She wondered if they could win. They fought fiercely for survival, but she doubted it. The first monster attacked the girl. Having time to react, she impaled the creature on the blade of a knife. Swinging the knife like a professional, the girl increased the number of corpses lying next to her. She tried her best, cutting off the heads of monsters for her friend. Xiangchen smashed zombie heads with his huge hammer. Their necks curled, deep depressions formed, but they continued to growl. One of the zombies was able to bite the guy's hand. Continuing to struggle, he screamed, but did not stop lowering his weapon. Juyeon, hearing the screams, was already giving up morally. She wanted to survive with all her might, but it would be pointless to die here, she thought. The girl cut another monster in half with a wave of her knife, but then her eyes were filled with shock. She saw something or someone among the large number of monsters. A man's voice was heard behind the glass doors, muttering that he had been woken up. It was Yuan clutching a soda can. The girl had tears in her eyes. She looked at the guy in fear and thought that this was absurd, because no matter how much the level and stats rose, the reflection of Yuan appeared in her eyes, swinging an aluminum can. The girl ended up thinking that she would kill the monster with just one can. This is too much. She ducked her head and the young man threw the drink, smashing the monster's head. Blood gushed out from the body of this creature. Yuan took a stance, lightning bolts of energy swirling around his hands and blade. The young man killed one spider, immediately making a dash for the second. He raised his leg to strike. Having hit the monster, the guy separated the head from the body. The spider's green blood splattered everywhere. The bodies of the monsters collapsed. The guy lowered his leg and attacked. The guys silently watched what was happening. He rested his hand on his knee, exhaling heavily. The girl pressed herself close to her ally, looking at Yuan. Xiangchen clasped his wounded hand, clenched his teeth and looked at the young man. The girl touched his hand. Coming closer, the guys thanked Yuan. Yuan added that thanks to him, they survived. Suddenly, a sharp pain attacked the guy's hand. Xiangchen knelt down. The girl put her hand on his back, leaning towards him. Yuan hid his weapon and began to approach them. He threw them a small container of ointment, telling them to anoint their hands with it first because it was a good medicine. The girl caught the jar with a fussy movement. The young man asked how many stamina stats they had. Xiangchen replied that he had about 17. Suddenly his facial expression changed to a worried one. He pursed his lip and looked at Yuan in fear. After his words that in this case he would not die, although there was a chance that he would no longer be able to use the bitten hand. Xiangchen lifted his sleeve and began to quickly smear the medicine over his arm. Yuan held his neck, closed his eyes and thought that he had slept for about 6 hours, and that the fatigue had generally passed, but he wanted to sleep some more. He remembered moments from fighting monsters in the past, thinking that this was the first time he had gone to sleep in 3 days, so he was very tired. The image in his mind changed to the moment he fell asleep after buying powder to mask odors, and he thought that he had to buy a sleep aid. He furrowed his brows as he looked to the side and thought that he had not expected that there would be other interference. The guys looked at the young man tensely. Yuan turned around and began to walk away from them. The girl called out to him, asking if he constantly hunts there. She looked intensely into his face, saying that losses happen there more often than at the top, and if he is unlucky, he may encounter an underground snake, so it is quite dangerous, to which the hero replied that he is not there all the time. Looking over his shoulder at the guys, he said that there was a cafe and a place to relax. Yuan asked what he meant. Looking at them, he explained that he had other hunting grounds. The concrete staircase was covered in cracks. Water had collected in a hole in the floor. The guys got to their feet. Xiangchen looked around the cave, saying that the dungeon was really 2-story, after which he added that the structure was completely different and really looked like a hunting ground. Juyon hesitantly held the sword. Following Yuan, the guy said, holding the blade in his hand, that at the moment something else was more important. After which he asked why they came there. Knowing about the danger, the girl said that due to the fact that he was constantly underground, does not know the situation outside. The young man turned to her, looking into her face. The girl added that everyone upstairs was squabbling. No one trusts anyone and everyone is killing each other, so there is complete chaos outside due to the battle of entities. The guy went further. The guys followed him. Yuan said that, apparently, they were attacked, and that's why they ran away. The girl confirmed his guess, and the young man added that even their pursuers did not go underground after them. Yuan kicked the ground, saying that they themselves almost died. The girl replied that in the end they still survived. The wind created by the blow of his foot began to blow them away. The girl did not have time to finish saying that they were saved thanks to him. The guys trembled in fear and looked at him. The guy asked what that sound was. The heroes stood half sideways towards them while the wind was raging around them, and repeated the girl's words of gratitude. He calmly looked into their eyes, asking where the guarantee was that he would not kill them or take away their essence. And the guys tensed, staggering back. The girl squeezed the blade with both hands, thinking that they didn't even think about it because he had already saved their lives. Their legs trembled slightly. The girl added that regarding the people above and the monsters swarming below, he is much more dangerous. Xiangchen timidly said that with his level, he has definitely already collected enough essence, so there is no point in killing them. The guy standing opposite them sternly said that it might be that he wants to collect even more essence. Xiangchen again insisted on his own. The hero looked at them menacingly, calmly saying that even if he did not kill them, they themselves would die in this place, after which he added that they themselves knew the reason. The girl looked at him in fear, pursing her lip, and thought that all this was really strange, and then wondered why he would say such things if he wanted to harm them. The guys stood warily in front of him. The girl suddenly realized something, after which she asked what he wanted from them. The hero smiled slightly. The guys looked puzzled in his face. After he said that he had a good offer for them, the young man explained that if they did well, he would share the essences with them, after which he offered to go further. The serpentine monster opened its mouth wide. Xiangqun, in horror, ran with all his might from the monster and, shouting throughout the cave, wondered whether this was really a good offer. Frowning his brows in horror, he remembered how the hero approached them while they were kneeling and asked if he had hurt himself much. Xiangqun replied that his leg was fine. Yuan calmly said that it was good. He looked at the guy with a smile, adding that in this case he should run. The frightened young man ran away from the monster, which was rushing after him through the cave at high speed, and called for help. Yuan, sword in hand, rose into the air in front of the monster's open mouth. He plunged the blade into the snake's throat, spewing out its blood. Yuan pushed off the monster's body with explosive force. He made a dash towards the giant red lizard. Finding himself close to him, the guy struck several quick blows with his blade. The next second, the lizard's body fell apart, scarlet blood gushed everywhere. Xiangqun collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. He looked back at the heroes and thought that his attack speed was simply unrealistic. He watched as the monsters behind him fell apart from the youth's blade, wondering how many essences he had already collected if he always killed so quickly. The entity and monsters fell to the ground. Xiangqun ran up to them, held them out in his hand, and thought that perhaps the difference in the level of monsters being killed plays a role, but the percentage of essences dropped is also extremely high. Touching the ball, he added that in 2 hours of hunting they collected 50 essences, so this man is not just strong. Yuan's hand grabbed the neighboring entity. The bloody guy took the ball and did not rise to his feet. Holding a blood-covered sword in his hand, he looked into the eyes of Xiangqun, who thought that Yuan was a bird of a completely different flight. Xiangqun staggered back in fear after being asked how many essences he had collected. The hero looked at the guy who picked up another ball. Xiangqun said that they had another one, so that's 6 in total. The guy replied that he could take one for himself. Xiangqun handed him the essences, thinking that the speed of the monsters coming did not keep up with the speed of the hunt. Rising to his feet, he looked at the guy and wondered where he was going to use so many entities, after which he said that his ally was a little late. Yuan replied that she would slowly catch up with them. Yuan looked at the young man who asked what his level was. Yuan lowered his head. The young man added that with such a speed of hunting, his level should already be serious. The hero replied that his level gradually stopped growing. Xiangqun turned pale and fell into a stupor after he said that he would raise the level in the next tutorial, after which he wondered how high his level was since he was no longer raising. The guy came closer to him and said that the level is personal information, so he shouldn't ask it from others and answer it himself, and the same goes for stats. Xiangqun recoiled, raised his hands and said in horror that recently a guy asked him how much stamina he had. The young man displeasedly asked if it would be better if he let his arm rot. He dusted off his sword. Xiangqun put his hand on his face, realizing his words. The guy added that from time to time he should hunt monsters and collect not only essences, but also raise his level. Juyeon extended his hand in front of him, shouting loudly to Yuan. She ran away from the monsters with all her might, stumbling and screaming. Xiangqun looked at this in fear. Yuan quickly turned to the girl. Xiangqun said that they did not have time to really rest. The heroes made a dash towards the monster while the girl ran forward. Small grains of sand fell on the ground. Xiangqun delivered a powerful blow with his hammer to the base of the monster's neck. He looked at the monster's body, realizing that he had just killed it. The system announced that its level had been raised. The monster in front of the girl collapsed. She looked back at her ally and asked if his level had risen. The guy answered in the affirmative, asking how things were going for her. Juyeon said that everything was the same for her. The guy reached out to the sphere shining on the floor. Yuan approached them. The young man picked up the sphere from the floor. The hero asked if they were finished. The guys answered in the affirmative. Yuan also leaned towards the entity. The young man asked if they could take these entities. The hero answered in the affirmative, adding that they killed these monsters. The girl watched with a calm expression as he gave her the sphere. The young man said that now they should both have 50 pieces each. She confirmed his guess. Looking at her hands, she said that before coming underground they had 20 pieces, so she didn't expect that she would gain another 30 so quickly, after which she thanked the guy. He raised his head, looked away from her and thanked them in return, saying that thanks to them the hunt had more than doubled, after which he thought that the extracted entities were not worth talking about. He looked up at the system report board and thought that there were 2 hours and 57 minutes left. He turned his back to them and took a step forward, mentally adding that the enemy's activation time was slowly approaching, after which he said that since they were finished, it was time to rise. The guys looked at him with a smile. The young man was delighted with these words. Yuan he went up the stairs. The guys followed him. The girl said that she was wondering if there was still bedlam going on upstairs. Her colleague replied that the further it went, the worse, but not better, because the third tutorial was ending. He looked in front of him and said that the people outside were annoying. The scarlet energy of the gate swirled in the air. People noticed that the gate was colored red. The portal hung over the city road. A bunch of people stood a little far from it. A man in the crowd said that it means the gate will open soon. He touched the pouch on his belt, which contained 45 mana essences, after which he said that everyone was hiding knives behind their backs, chatting to each other as if nothing was happening, after which he called it absurd. He clenched his teeth, looking in front of him, standing next to him, and the bald man said that the likelihood of the essence falling out is also disgusting, because rather than kill monsters, risking his life, it's faster to defeat a person and take them away. The dark-haired man said that all people think the same. His comrade added that even so, it doesn't look like anyone is itching to do anything. The man furrowed his eyebrows, clenched his teeth harder, and said that with the opening of the gate, everything would change, after which he thought that as soon as it was activated, he would quickly take away the essences and escape. Standing at the edge of the road, the man's comrade asked if the leader of the other side was looking at them. Myung-hoon emerged from the crowd. The men looked at him in surprise. The bald guy asked if he was coming towards them. The guy came closer to them, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time, about 2 days. The dark-haired man replied that they were not in the right relationship to greet each other joyfully. Myung-hoon frowned angrily, saying that their pride was playing again, after which he added that they knew very well what was coming. He slightly raised his palms, standing in front of the man, and asked if they were aware of the current situation, because by opening the gates a bloody rain would fall. The man clenched his teeth, frowned deeply, and thought that the guy was smart because he had put together a gang for this moment. The young man slightly tilted his head to the side, raised his hand, and then answered the man's question about how much he lacked, saying that compared to them, they had much more art. The blonde furrowed his brows, looking away. The man froze in place when he heard that they needed about 700 essences. He clenched his fist, his hand trembled. The man thought that even if they combined everything they had, there would only be 300 pieces, so this is an absurd demand, and in this way it is impossible to avoid conflict. Blocks to the sides, smilingly telling them to give only 400, and then they will good-naturedly retreat and collect the rest themselves. Myung-hoon grinned nervously, his brows furrowed. Standing in front of the men in their group, he thought that if the man refused, an all-out massacre would begin, after which he figured that the balance of forces was 50 to 20, so the battle would be unprofitable. Suddenly Seongchan appeared in the crowd, asking for forgiveness. The blonde wondered if he should insist that they give half, or vice versa. Juyeon and Seongchan came out of the crowd. The guy looked back at them. The dark-haired man frowned in surprise as he recognized someone in the crowd. Yuan, with a box in his hands, followed the guys. The man called his name. The cardboard box fell to the ground with a crash. The young man sat down next to her, taking out his bags. The blonde asked where he went, because he had not been seen for several days. Yuan replied that, obviously, he went on business. The guy looked down with a calm expression on his face. The blonde asked if he had collected all the essences. The young man confirmed his guess. He lifted the bag, holding onto the belt. People looked in surprise as a bunch of entities fell into the box. The spheres fell on each other with a ringing sound. The blonde called it incredible. While Yuan was digging through the box, people in the crowd were discussing how many entities were in the box. Someone said that there were definitely more than 1,000 of them. The blonde frowned angrily, wondering how he had collected so many. He looked away, adding that he had nothing to be afraid of, because there were a lot of people behind him. He looked at the crowd of men, thinking there were at least 50 people behind him. He wanted to approach the box, adding that no matter how strong the young man was, he couldn't handle so many alone. Yuan stopped him, turning the guy's attention to the floor. Myung-hoon tensely lowered his gaze after the guy said that he should carefully look at his feet. There was a line carved in front of the blonde's shoe. Myung-hoon thought about what it was. Yuan addressed the people, saying that they all needed this. He lifted one sphere from the box, frowned slightly, and said that he no longer needed them, because he already had an overabundance. People joyfully threw up their hands. Everyone asked the guy for the essence. The young man added that it was not free. He looked ahead with a calm expression and named the price of 100 points apiece. He sat in the drawn circle, saying that only those who would buy would receive permission to enter the circle. People fussed intensely, saying that the price was too high and a robbery, and then wondered how many points they had now. Myung-hoon took out his blade after the guy said that the essences were not sold in the store, and they could only be purchased from a person. He put the sword in front of him, called the guy selfish, and asked how many hundreds of people would buy it from him, after which he called the deal ridiculous. He frowned with a smile, asking what would happen if there was nothing to pay with. Yuan calmly looked into his eyes. Sitting in a circle, the young man called this question strange, because in any case he was not going to force them to buy. With a calm expression, he added that let only those who want to buy, but there will be no deferred sales, but it is possible to sell an item or skill that is deferred or available somewhere. The people behind the blondes became alarmed after hearing what they heard. Myung-hoon looked back at them angrily. He clenched his blade, gritted his teeth, and, insulting the guy, said that the guy killed someone and took it all away, and now he was going to sell it for foreign currency, after which he exclaimed who he was trying to deceive. Juyeon raised her hands. The young man asked the blonde what would happen if he did not take it away. Mingun said that he should say possible things, but such things would not work. The girl shouted that it was not for him to say this. The guys frowned angrily, looking at the blonde. The girl added that he killed her friend, after which she asked if he knew where they fled. The guy said that, according to him, they who were with him should not have survived. The young man, standing behind Yuan, raised his hand, asking who he was targeting, because he knew nothing about this man. The blonde bulged his eyes in rage. A vein appeared on his neck. He said that this annoyed him and that they were doing stupid things, after which he asked what they could do since there were only 3 of them. The people behind him drew their weapons when he asked if they thought they would be safe sticking to the Yuan. He scowled in rage as he ordered his men to kill them. The men rushed forward, frowning furiously. Yuan air sword. With one blow he decapitated 2 men who had gone beyond the edge of the circle. Looking ahead sternly, he said they had crossed the line. The blonde looked in shock at the standing corpses from which blood was dripping. The boys' bodies fell to the ground. The other men staggered back. Myung-hoon raised his eyebrows in fear, remembering the moment when the guy, passing by him, told him not to cross the line under any circumstances, and then wondered if he really said it seriously. Yuan said that his conditions do not change if people pay, then he will sell the entities, and only the one who will buy will receive permission to enter the circle. Keeping his head down, he added that whether to buy or not is their choice, because he is not going to force, but if they cross this line for another purpose, then they will die. He looked up at the men, enveloped the sword in an aura, and activated the inferior magic sword. The blonde waved his blade, ordering his men to kill him. The men rushed forward again. The guy dodged one of the blows by bending down. In the next move, he beheaded one of the attackers and wounded the second in the chest. A blue aura began to rage around him, and the bodies of the dead fell to the ground. The blonde trembled slightly, looking at the splashes of blood, and mentally called it impossible. He was level 11, and he recoiled in fear, thinking that he was the one who had forgotten what kind of world this was. Taking a step back, he decided that he needed to run because it was all about the line, after which he thought that the young man said that only those who cross the line will die, so he will survive. The guy began to run away. I thought that he had survived. Yuan waved his sword, asking if he thought he was safe. The guy smiled intimidatingly, saying that he saw his face perfectly. The blonde's head flew upside down. He wondered what the young man meant. Yuan beheaded him in one move. Blood stains were everywhere around the drawn circle. Dead bodies lay next to each other. The guy, holding the sword in his hand, began to return to the box. He took the essences, saying that there was a mess all around. With the box in his hands, he approached another group of people, whose members began to disperse. They looked at him in fear. The dark-haired man looked at him in surprise, thinking that only one person could commit such a brutal murder, after which he emphasized that personal overwhelming force had slammed the collective one. He clenched his fist, adding that it was like a movie battle unfolding before his eyes. It seemed to him that he had already somehow adapted to this feast, but he was wrong. He unclenched his fist, lowering his hand. He raised it above his head. Dushik ran up to him from behind. The man said that he would buy the essence. The man took out a blade, looked at his ally, who asked where he would get the points, after which he said that lackey told him that this sword could be sold for 500 points. The man clenched his teeth, frowned, telling Dushik to think carefully, because this guy obtained all the essences only by hunting. Yuan placed the box in a new circle in front of the gate. Dushik asked why he got it. The man responded by asking if he thought that the guy would become so strong by killing just a couple of monsters. Besides, he didn't take the essence of people just killed. Yuan rubbed his chin. Looking at the floor, the man added that this proves that he did not steal, and this is a huge amount of entities, and he will adhere to the position of a fair deal. The guy looked back. The man entered the circle, holding out his hand. He frowned and asked for 7 pieces, thinking that the laws and rules of this world were created by the hands of such strong people. The guy shook his hand. The system announced the transfer of 700 points. People watched the deal, discussing the fact that they could just buy the essences and move on to the next stage. Someone asked how many points he had, because he only had 200. While the man was entering the gate, people approached the guy with statements that they would also buy essence. The man disappeared into the portal. People began to run to Yuan. Everyone named their numbers. Someone asked if anyone had any points left, because he will return them in the next tutorial. Lackey examined the sword, saying that the item was slightly damaged. Small creatures hovered in front of people. One of them valued the sword at 300 points. The man became indignant. The second lackey said that the product was not popular, so he could not give more than 2 stop points. The second guy called it a scam because the creature was selling the sword for 1,000. Standing with his back to the gate, the young man figured that one stat could be sold for 100 points, after which he sold 3 intuition stats. Yuan with a dissatisfied face shook the man's hand. The system announced the transfer of 411 points. The guy thought that the deal was not profitable at all. The next person passed through the gate. The young man lowered his hand and then thought that maybe this was better than dying here and now, but because of the rise of the tower, he realized how valuable the lost stats were. He kept looking ahead with a calm expression on his face. He had 167,400 points on his account. The guy thought that for him, in any case, everything had worked out well. Juyun turned to him while he was looking inside the box. I thought that he expected to receive at least 100,000, and this amount should be enough for everything planned. The girl called out to him, asking if he was leaving. Yuan looked back at the guys and asked why they weren't leaving. The girl replied that they wanted to go with him. Xiangchen stepped forward, calmly looking into the face of the guy who said that he was not going to make allies, after which he replied that he could use them as bait like last time, and if they turned out to be useless, he could just throw them away. Yuan listened to him silently, looking ahead. He lowered his head, closed his eyes and said with a smile that he was sorry, but that was all. He picked up the bag from the floor, saying that they should not rely on anyone, otherwise they would not be able to go far, after which he added that he would not go further. Xiangchen asked what that meant. The guys fell into a stupor, looking at him. The young man opened the bag, shook it in the air and said that he did not have a single essence left. He threw the bag, causing it to fall to the ground. The guys looked at him in surprise. They approached the guy. Xiangchen raised his eyebrows in shock, put out his hands and asked what he would do, because he had to put aside at least 50 pieces. The young man with a calm face said that although he wouldn't go, he was tired of walking away from them, saying that they should quickly move on, because chaos would soon begin. The girl called out to him by name. The guys looked after him in disappointment. The guy took his ally by the shoulder, saying that it was time for them to go. The guys approached the gate while the young man walked further and further. He looked away to the side, looking at the system window showing that the next step would be protection. The man ran up to him from the side and, apologizing, asked if he had sold all the entities. The man with glasses howled desperately, raising his eyebrows, after the guy said that the trade was completed. He collapsed to the ground, resting his hands on it. More people were also running from the side. The guy thought that it would be better to move first. Desperate residents grabbed their heads. The guy added that from now on this place will become a battlefield where they will risk their lives just to get the essences. He began to move away from the people who had come. Looking to the side, he thought that he had about 1 hour left until the tutorial was completed, after which he decided to visit the store. The ground shook slightly. A purple aura appeared over the road. Looking ahead, he guessed something, and suddenly a manager appeared before him, shrouded in energy. The man looked at him calmly, asking if he had called him. The guy looked up at him and said that he called, but not him, after which he asked what happened to all the lackeys. Since he arrived in person, the man explained that he was recruiting new ones, because the staff had been significantly reduced. He introduced 3 minions, one of whom had a red cross crossed through him. The guy asked if he had thinned the ranks too much. The man explained that about 1 in 3 had a connection, and many were involved. After which, he remembered the recent trade, saying that also, due to the fact that many subordinates had stayed there for a long time because of him, the other side's progress had slowed down a little. He gritted his teeth, double pointing his fingers at the guy after he asked why it was because of him, and then explained that over 100 people were using the store to make a deal with him. He lowered his head, closed his eyes and asked, "Isn't it good that the trade was successful?" After which he added that, "Be that as it may, is it possible that they have such a shortage of labor that the man came in person for the simple use of the store?" Standing next to the young man, the man explained that this was not an ordinary store, after which he asked if he really didn't know what his position was. The guy frowned, lowered his head slightly and, looking into the man's eyes, thought that he was an object of special service. If it is impossible to detect something with the manager's position, they usually close their eyes, but apparently they decided not to do it anyway. The men stood on the road. The manager added that the guy had 160,000 points at the end of the 3rd tutorial, and that his power could collapse the entire ecosystem of the tutorial. The young man replied that he didn't want this, so he didn't see any problems, since he was moving towards this. Standing in front of the man, he calmly insisted that he would use the store. The manager smiled slightly, called it absurd self-confidence and said that he had been a manager for a long time, but this was the first time he had met someone like him. The man raised his hand, in which a bright glow appeared. A store window opened in front of the guy. The man asked what he needed. The guy clicked on the item, saying that he would buy this first. The system announced the purchase of the average personal inventory for 10,000 points, and that the inventory could activate the team item. The guy bought a steel sword from Ice Jade and spent 50,000 points. The blade appeared in the air in front of him. The man watched as the blade began to move into the inventory after the guy's command, after which he said that the rest of the Ice Jade sword was quite a difficult item. The young man also bought a fire spell robe for 60,000 points and a magic deactivation shield for 20,000 points. Then, what can definitely be called the destruction of the tutorial's ecosystem. The guy threw off his outerwear to the ground, thinking that items of this level could be useful up to a fairly high level of the tower. The young man took the shield in his hand, threw on a red cloak and took a step forward with a confident expression on his face. Then the guy bought 4 ice crystals for 20,000 points. Standing in front of the store window, He said that lastly he wanted to ask for one well-forged sword, but a certain blade appeared in the air in front of him. The guy spent 2,000 points on it. He took the sword in his hand, the shield began to disappear. Going into inventory, the manager said that his last purchase was the most basic item, which is incompatible with other items stuffed with magic. The young man said that he was satisfied. There were 54 points left in his account. The man smiled broadly, looking at him, and said that now not a single person can touch him, and the participants in the tutorial will not even be able to leave clues on these clothes. The guy frowned warily after the man's words that this only concerned the participants. The man disappeared, leaving behind a bright flash of purple energy, and finally he said that he was in anticipation. The energy began to dissipate through the air. The guy, standing in one place, tusked displeasedly. He raised his head, looking up. The countdown on the system window ended. The young man said that now everything will begin. The system announced the completion of the third tutorial. The timer window in the air broke into pieces. The system window that appeared said that the young man had failed in completing the tutorial. The earth shook all around, and the gates closed. The system announced the beginning of the destruction of the area. The monsters crawled out. System energy raged between the buildings. The guy looked at the scarlet sky, saying that he had not seen it for a long time. He touched the red cape. The system description window said that this is a garment that contains an ancient spell, and that it is made of a special material. The effect it gives is enhanced resistance to fire attribute magic. Squeezing the cloth on his shoulder, the young man thought that he had done the right thing, because first he needed to protect his body from the air starting to heat up, and in the tower itself this item would greatly help in protecting against fire. He calmly looked in front of him. People all around were screaming in agony due to the heating of the area. They asked for help and said that they wanted to die. Taking a step forward, he thought that there were about 3 people left. The young man approached the kneeling people. One of the men looked up at him and asked why he was there. The hero exchanged glances with him. With his hand on the ground, the man wanted to say something, but the road beneath him split. A powerful explosion burst out from under the asphalt. People began to burn alive, asking for help. The guy stepped back and, slightly frowning, watched what was happening. The system announced the destruction and the beginning of the 176 giant. The entire city was engulfed in flames. The bone hand grabbed the ground. A demonic skeleton with horn-like appendages looked menacingly ahead, scarlet flames escaping from its eyes. A huge number of unfit level demons rose to the surface. The young man took out his sword, activated his shield, and said that there were quite a lot of monsters. Looking sternly in front of him, he thought that the whole point was different, after which he noticed the one he was looking for. A column of fire stretched towards the sky. The young man added that the reason why this was called destruction. Dark eyes emitting a violet glow appeared in the raging flames. The system announced the appearance of the lower-class demon Surutra. The young man ended with the thought that the reason for this was Surutra. The guy put his blade a little to the side, finding the enemy he was looking for. He smiled slightly as he looked at the demon and called him by name. The raging flame still rose up to the sky. The guy thought that during Ragnarok its size was the size of a mountain, but here it was only the size of a large house. The scarlet fiery hands of the demon rested on the ground. The monster groaned slightly. The giant flame demon walked behind his army of skeletons, saying that another world would disappear by being swallowed up by the tower. The system called him the 176th child. The demon looked down at the guy who interrupted his speech that if this world was destined to disappear, he should not have been born in the first place. The young man shouted to him, asking why so much sentimentality in as many as 176 children, if he is not even in menopause, after which he said that the demon would stop because it was time for them to start. The demons looked at the young man, recognizing him as Ogong. He squatted slightly to the ground, calling him a monkey from a mountain of flowers and fruits, because he has the same eyes. The ground cracked under his feet. Surutra asked if he could really get out of this place. A giant sword appeared in the hands of the demon. His army was heading straight towards the guy. The young man put his swords to the side, engulfed in an aura, bent down slightly and looked into the eyes of the skeleton. In one motion, he cut the monster's skull into 2 pieces. The next moment the skeleton exploded, hiding the guy from the flames. The demon looked at what was happening, puzzled. The smoke from the explosion blocked visibility. When the smoke cleared, revealing the young man, the demon asked if he was prepared to fight back, because this is an unusual garment. The system announced that the fire spell robe compensated for the heat from the explosion of the skull, and that this artifact provides additional resistance to attacks with the fire attribute. The young man smiled slightly, understood the look, and asked if he thought it was a wise investment. Yuan took a step forward, adding that he prepared all this not to repel him, but to hunt him. The demon raised his hand, touched his chin, and called it impudent and presumptuous words, after which he said that the young man would have to repeat all this when he got to him. The guy spread his legs wider, lowered his head, and said that he realized that the demon's seat was too heavy to lift. Surutra said that he wanted to see how long he could remain so free. Yuan looked up, frowned confidently, and said that the demon talks too much. With explosive force, he rose into the air, swinging his blade. I cut through the air with my sword. He smashed the enemy into pieces. While in the air, the young man cut down several enemies at once. The system announced the level increase. He looked over his shoulder at the resulting flames from the explosion. A series of explosions covered the street. The shield he held in his left hand was covered in cracks from the flames. Breaking out of the fire, he headed towards the rest of the enemies. With another blow, he provoked another explosion. The purchased artifacts protected him. The system announced a new level increase. He lowered his gaze slightly, the system also adding that his agility, stamina, and mana were increased by 1 unit. He looked up tiredly, thinking that even though he was wearing a fiery spell, it was hard to absorb the heat for 2 hours, and his body became stuffy. The monsters, staggering, headed towards the guy. The young man thought that the explosions with which the skulls die were quite threatening, and although the force of the blow was small, but since there was no way to evade, he accepted it with his whole body. Yuan Teeth looked at the opponents and added that he could attack at a long distance with concentrated mana, but this skill has a huge energy consumption, so it is problematic to use it in a long battle. He looked at the shield, covered with cracks, and thought that he, too, was gradually reaching his limit, and that he was damn lucky that the shield could withstand a good 1,000 explosions, after which he decided that it was time to slowly get down to business. He looked up at the rock on which the demon was sitting, and, turning to him, told him to stop sending minions and come down himself. Surutra took up his blade and called the guy's artifacts incredible, after which he added that they were so incredible that he did not understand how the young man got such things in the tutorial. Yuan frowned warily. The demon jumped towards him, kicking up dust into the air. The guy raised his head, looked into his face, and asked if he had a conscience, because he, in turn, was creating arbitrariness on the territory of the tutorial. The demon replied that he was only punishing those who had no right. Exposing the sword, he pointed the tip of the blade at the guy and added that, however, the young men have it, because he has all the makings of becoming a ruler, rising to the endless tower and becoming a ranker. Yuan scratched his ear. The demon asked why the guy was there and if he was removed instead of allies, to which the hero replied that, as he already said, he came to hunt the demon. Surutra waved his sword, asking if he was really going to kill him, and then laughed. He raised his sword above his head. The guy put his blade to the side, taking a stance. The monster said that in this case he needs to fight back. Yuan raised his hand, covering himself with his sword, and thought that his body had already absorbed enough flames. The demon struck with incredible force, creating a flash after hitting the shield. The young man decided that he had to cope. The shield in the guy's hands finally split, becoming covered with shining cracks. He shattered into pieces under the yoke of the demon's sword, and the ground under the young man's feet also opened up. Standing under the demon's blade, he frowned, gritted his teeth, and remembered the image of Ogong, thinking about Surutra's question. The demon's fiery blade hit the ground, splitting it and sending dust into the air. Surutra looked down at the place of impact. The young man mentally recited the words of Ogong, who said that the method was unusual because he had failed the 3rd tutorial. The fragments of stones lay under the edge of the demon's sword. The young man continued that, of course, he failed not because he was weak, there were simply all sorts of reasons. But in any case, the following is important in this story. Ogong asked if the young man knew what is meant by destruction coming to the area of the tutorial, after which he told the guy to listen carefully, because these eyes. Surutra removed the sword from the rebel, looking at them. The stones were piled up. The demon thought that this was strange, because he had the feeling that the guy was deliberately exposing himself to the attack. A scarlet aura began to emanate from under the rubble. The demon wondered why he did this. Surutra turned his attention in surprise to the guy who had climbed out from under the rubble. His face was burned. He exhaled hot air and said that it was hot, and he thought he was going to die, after which he mentally said that this brawler had fought hundreds of battles with him out of his own whim. Rising heavily to his feet, he added that he had only managed to win a few battles out of countless numbers, and there were several reasons for this. He imagined the image of Ogong sitting on the clouds and thought that the divine item Rui Jingu, the primordial Kintoan cloud, known for being able to strike lightning and reach the end of the universe in the blink of an eye, and the limitless mana resulting from absorption an entire peninsula of heavenly treasures. Yuan kept his head down as he stood among the low fire. Raising his flaming eyes at the demon, he added that the most important reason why it was troublesome to fight him. A window appeared with a description that said that monkey eyes, assimilated with demon fire, distinguish between good and evil, truth and lies, and also have strong resistance to fire, a rank item, mastery rate 12.14%, effect resistance to fire attribute, maximizing all senses in combat predictions. The system announced that the guy received fiery eyes. The brunette's eyes lit up with a bright flame. He felt his body begin to burn in his clothes, although before he received his eyes, he was able to withstand it without special objects. The creature, shrouded in flames, gazed at its opponent and noticed a change in its eyes. At this moment, the main character mentally called him an ignorant carcass. The outline of a steel sword of ice jade began to appear in the guy's hand, with crystals floating next to it. He didn't expect that he would one day respect his rival, after which he thanked Surutra. Yuan grabbed the handle of his weapon tightly when a sign appeared indicating the end of preparations for the hunt. Burning with flame, the monster threw his sword over his shoulder and began to laugh. He asked his opponent what he planned to do in this state. Baring his teeth, the guy tried to touch himself with his hand and said that this was nothing for him. A system sign appeared, informing him that he had absorbed an ice crystal. The creature, pulling out its fangs, looked at the main character in surprise as its temperature began to drop slightly. He saw a system sign that, using mana, which added cold, the guy's burns began to calm down. The gentleman hit the ground with all his might so that debris scattered. He noticed that his high body temperature began to subside quickly. A blue mist began to emerge from the corners of his mouth. At that moment, he realized that the ability began to freeze him. The monster suddenly threw something at the guy, who thought about the energy enveloping his body. The main character repelled with a sword the attack of an enemy whose ability was completely opposite to his. A huge explosion occurred in the collapsing dungeon. Angered, Yuan frowned deeply as he tried to deflect the fire attack. A system sign has appeared stating that fire spell robes, which gain additional magical resistance to flame attribute attacks, resist Surutra's annihilating flames, just like the guy's fiery eyes. The steel sword slammed into the enemy's fiery flames as the robes of the flame spell began to absorb the monster's annihilating fire, causing an extreme drop in temperature. A system sign appeared stating that the main character is able to resist burns. The creature's eyes flashed yellow. The rivals, looking at each other, simultaneously swung their weapons. The fiery creature looked at the brunette approaching him. Purple liquid began to splash out from Surutra as the protagonist cut it with his sword. The monster screamed loudly. He looked back angrily at his opponent. The eyes of the protagonist, who bared his teeth, glowed red. He decides to try something. The guy was surprised when clusters of mana flew towards him. A bead of sweat began to run down his face. He decided to evade because it had become too dangerous. The monster extended his hand forward. A system sign appeared indicating that fiery eyes are activating battle prediction. Surutra, looking intently at the enemy, swung his hand with all his might. The iron sword began to sparkle with blue light. The main character tightly grabbed the handle of the weapon when the flames began to approach him. He laughed loudly. Angry, the brunette waved his hand away after reabsorbing the ice crystals. His body temperature began to drop extremely as he reached frostbite. The fire monster grabbed the handle of his weapon tightly. At this moment, Yuan realized that with his current body he would not be able to withstand the cold for long. He became sad and lowered his head. The guy decided that he needed to finish quickly. The main character managed to dodge the enemy's attack. His sword sparkled brightly as he decided that he no longer needed to conserve his mana. A system sign appeared indicating that he had used a magic sword skill. Slipping under the enemy, the brunette swung his weapon hard. Debris scattered throughout the dungeon as Surutra fell to the ground. He turned his head menacingly at his opponent. A blue stream of energy appeared behind the monster as the protagonist used the concentration of mana. The creature fell back as a stream of energy slammed into its body. The monster's head was covered in blue. The angry Yuan's eyes glowed. He threw his body back as the creature's head shattered into pieces. The guy hit his opponent with all his force. The main character, holding on to Surutra, tried to climb up his back. The brunette in the red cloak became more angry when the enemy called him a green sword that is not even able to climb the tower. The entire dungeon was covered in bright flames while Yuan sat on the back of the creature, who thought that he was acting brazenly. The guy pressed his fingers on the enemy's body as he used the cold and fire spell clothing, which counteract the destructive fire of Surutra. He noticed that even after using all the means to resist fire, the difference did not decrease. The guy's body began to be covered in bright flames when he used his eyes, which, resisting the destructive fire of the creature, began to consume him. A system sign appeared indicating that he was able to break through the enemy's resistance. The guy grabbed the handle of the weapon tightly as third-degree burns began to appear on his body. At this moment, a sign appeared stating that his flame resistance had increased by 1 unit. He held his opponent's body and raised his weapon. Yuan decided that he could win. The main character plunged into the monster with a sword, from which strong energy emanates. Surutra tried to stop him. The brunette's sword began to crack. The monster fell to the ground with a crash as a system sign appeared indicating that the creature's destruction had been defeated. The weapon in the guy's hand began to disappear as he laughed loudly. He looked up when the level up sign appeared. The main character realized that he really was able to kill Surutra. Yuan remembered how he fought with another opponent, thanks to which he raised his level. He believes this is just the beginning. A devilish smile appeared on his face. He understands that his dear one will be quite broken. A system sign appeared, informing that the guy had received an achievement that was impossible to believe. The main character, with his eyes closed, was lying on the ground. He tried to open his eyes slightly. The guy lying near the monster's body stood up. Trembling his body, he began to finger his fingers. He, seeing that his burns were still not gone, assumed that he had not been unconscious for long. The brunette in the red cloak touched his hand. He realized that his ability was serious because the same cold remained in his body. Remembering the entire battle with Surutra, he thought that he would die then. He knows that he is now in the intermediate stage of obtaining golden flame eyes. The main character approached the lifeless body of the creature. He, realizing that even though the tutorial had not yet finished, decided that he should stop because he had a long way ahead of him. The ground beneath the creature with huge fangs began to crack. The brunette realized that his body was complex despite the fact that it looked plain after the flames disappeared. Yuan, sitting on the dead body of the enemy, tore off his bone. He believes that all byproducts of a demon's body are items. At this moment, he remembered that a being of Surutra level had some pretty special items. The guy's pupils narrowed in surprise. The large crystal located in the monster's body sparkled brightly. The brunette realized that he had found the heart of a giant born in the land of fire, who was able to pour fire energy through him. Holding the crystal in his hand, the main character looked at it intently. He decided that he wanted to absorb the object right now, but he understood that with his current body it would be difficult for him to do this. After which he remembered that this miraculous medicine changes the very structure of the body of the absorbing person, which is why he needs quite a lot of stamina for this. Yuan looked at someone in confusion when he was called out. The bearded man, baring his teeth, asked the guy if he was finished. Putting the item into his inventory, the brunette looked intently at the man and asked him, "Is it him again?" Hearing this, the man with the severed hand told him that he should tell him this. The tutorial manager began to approach the guy who jumped off the monster. He informed him that he still has a long way to go at this level. Hearing this, the man said that he was scolded because tutorial's balance had reached a critical state. The man with long hair grabbed his head when he remembered the main character who fights all the monsters. He doesn't understand where Yuan came from, which gives him a headache. The manager, standing opposite the brunette, demanded that he first go to the last area because the fourth tutorial was almost over. Hearing this, the guy asked him how much time he had left. The man told him that there were about 4 hours left. The bearded man extended his hand to Yuan, who said that 4 hours would be enough for him. They held hands tightly. The manager said that he had been discussing for a long time with his comrades on other floors what kind of reward to give him. A system sign appeared about the transfer of 10,000 points. A blue mist began to develop around as the man firmly shook the protagonist's hand. A system sign appeared about receiving a heaven-slaying star, thanks to which all the guy's stats increased by 3 units. The brunette, lowering the manager's hand, frowned deeply when he thought about the heaven-slaying star. He thought he was aware of all the satisfying top-level skills. At that moment he realized that he was hearing about this subject for the first time. A system sign appeared stating that the heaven-slaying star is given to a talented person who is destined to slay the heavens. The main character assumed that he could not get an A+ level skill in tutorial, and he also knows that high-level skills are not all good. But despite this, the effectiveness of this is high due to the increase in stats. Yuan frowned deeply. A system sign has appeared indicating that the effect of increasing all stats by 3 units has been completed. He was confused by the fact that the skill was not completed, but even so it was suitable for compensating for the lack of stats. The manager and the main character were standing near the dead creature when he asked the guy if he needed anything after rewarding him. The brunette asked him for a small pill. A window appeared in front of the man to buy a small pill. He called Yuan a fan of spending money on expensive things. At this moment, a system sign appeared stating that the main character, having spent 10,000 points, received a pill. Lowering his head, the guy grabbed his chin. The bearded man announced that he was leaving since there were no more requests for him. The brunette looked blankly at the man, who advised him to rest a little after taking the pill. A system sign appeared stating that by consuming the small pill, Yuan's mana and stamina increased by 1 unit. The main character remained alone near the defeated creature when the manager informed him that they would see each other soon. The guy's wounds began to heal due to the fact that his stamina began to quickly recover. The brunette placed his wounded hand on his knee. He realizes that he has 4 hours left to restore his stamina and prepare for the 5th tutorial. Yuan leaned his whole body on the monster. He knows that a race awaits him in the 5th tutorial. Waking up, the guy tried to open his eyes. Seeing that the dungeon space began to transform, the main character realized that everything had already begun. The brunette in black boots took a step forward. He almost fell when the space began to change. The guy in the red cloak stepped on the green grass when the system sign appeared about the start of the latest tutorial. The main character, looking intently at something, raised his head. He walked towards the remaining dungeon players. The brunette in chainmail, raising his head, noticed that he smelled of the sea. Hearing this, his partner thought about how huge the dungeon was. There were a huge number of people in the forest who were walking somewhere dissatisfied. They were in the place where tutorial participants from different worlds gather for the first time when the tower announced the final round. The men raised their heads high and saw a sign that they were in the assembled world, which was the last tutorial. Someone suggested that their dungeon run would finally end. Hearing this, another player demanded that he shut up. Near the seething reservoir there was a high mountain. A system sign appeared informing participants that the island of Baraganda is slowly sinking into the sea, which is why players need to escape from it and prove their claim. The volcano, covered in greenery, began to erupt in flames. Participants must first kill the boss located at the top of the island, thanks to which they are awarded points depending on their contribution. At this point, they were informed that the final reward was determined depending on the points and time spent on capturing. The players were also notified that after 30 days, the island would completely go underwater. A system sign appeared above the dungeon indicating a time limit of 720 hours. The participants were surprised that a whole month was given for this task. The main character raised his head and clenched his hands into fists. He remembered that so far the longest round had lasted 3 days, and the short quest ended in just 1 hour. After which he realized that now there is no need to take up arms and fight, because the longer the time limit to achieve the goal, the better for him. He tilted his head to the side with displeasure when he suggested that a month was given to kill the first boss. In other words, he realized that this is how long it might take them to fight the monster. Near the guy stood 3 drooping men. He realized that some people realized the meaning of this time. The blue-eyed blonde raised his head and asked the players if everyone had heard the announcement. He, believing that they met for a reason, suggested that the guys create teams. He was surrounded by the rest of the players when a man in a dirty sweater said that they could try to unite. Hearing this, the participant with the brown bag decided that he was also in favor of such an idea and invited everyone to meet. An unknown man in a white cloak, baring his teeth, loudly said that he refused. Players began to approach a person who believes that an ally is the one he trusts with his back and shoulder, after which he said that this is why he wants to choose his own partner. Yuan turned his head towards the unknown, who believes that no one is suitable to be his ally. The main character remembered that this player was also in the dungeon. The blonde, clenching his hand into a fist, decided to attack the man in the white cloak and called him an impudent man. The hood opened slightly, revealing his brightly glowing eyes. With one blow he was able to attack all the men who approached him. The remaining players were scared when they saw the attackers fly into the air. While the unknown person continued to cast his spell, the men fell to the ground with a roar. The white hood fell from his head. Hargon, who is the self-proclaimed heir to Olympus, said menacingly that he was not pleased. The attackers' bodies continued to sparkle as the players wondered what skill the blonde was using against them. Yuan remembered how Hargon attacked everyone in the dungeon. He believes that the high-rank pureblood power he showed at the beginning of the 5th tutorial will be of great interest to the tower. The guy imagined a strong aura emanating from the baby. He knows that purebloods, born and raised in the tower, once chosen, begin their rise. At that moment, he remembered that, from the moment of their birth, they absorb the secrets of the tower, thanks to which they differ in level from other participants. After which he realized that right now the fair game had come to an end. He imagined the blonde hovering over the ancient buildings. The brunette knows that this player is the one who contributed the most in the 5th past life tutorial. The main character looked down and realized that he did not want to be associated with Hargon. He decided that he needed to get away from the gathering place of the participants. Yuan looked around with displeasure when he was called out. Hargon approached him, clenching his fists. The main character asked him what happened. The brunette bared his teeth angrily and asked the blonde if he was talking to him. At this moment, he thought about when the pureblood managed to approach him. Frowning his eyebrows, the blonde looked intently at the guy and said that he was addressing him specifically. He pointed his finger at the main character and asked him if he was wearing clothes from the robe of the fire spell. Yuan looked displeased at the interlocutor standing next to him, who noticed that his subject was not available in the tutorial. The guy asked him where he got it from. The brunette tilted his head to the side and talked about how he bought it for points. Hargon frowned deeply and looked at the main character in surprise. Standing opposite a guy dressed in a red cloak, the blonde wondered how he could buy such an expensive item. The pureblood asked him what level he had. Hearing this, Yuan told him that it was rude to ask such a thing. Worried, Hargon grabbed his hand and realized that the protagonist was right. He was surprised that the guy even managed to learn this in tutorial. The blonde raised his hand and said that he would no longer question him. The brunette began to move away from the pureblood, who invited him to create a team. Having refused, the main character wished him good luck. Drops of sweat began to run down the player's angry face. He turned around abruptly and asked Yuan to wait for him, assuming that he did not know who he was. The brunette admitted to him that he was not interested in this offer. Standing in front of the remaining participants, Hargon clenched his hands tightly into fists. The ground began to crumble under his foot. A huge stream of energy pierced through the forest. The blonde loudly demanded that the main character stop. Meanwhile, a monster with huge fangs opened its mouth. The player, shrouded in a strong aura, pointed his finger at him. Hargon hit the creatures with one hit. He fell to the ground with a crash after killing all the monsters. The guy, angry, bared his teeth. He didn't understand why Yuan was fast. Looking at the sunlit forest path, the blonde assumed that the main character used a speed-increasing skill. He thought about how many stats this player has. The guy imagined the image of a brunette and thought that he was a purebred. At that moment he was trying to remember the one who had nimble legs. Hargon, crouching, put his hand on his knee and suggested that Yuan had elves in his ancestors, after which he thought that he was a martial master. The blonde stood up and touched his cloak with his hand. He suggested that the main character is a relative of Hermes. A devilish smile appeared on his face. He realized that it was becoming much more interesting. The guy in the red cloak stopped abruptly. The brunette, standing on a tree branch, looked back and realized that he was able to break away from the purebred. The main character remembered the player in the white cape and realized that he was damn fast. He believes that the player used his brute Herculean strength to accelerate because speed is not his special talent. Yuan jumped from a branch while deep in the forest. The brunette tilted his head as he remembered the manager's words that Tutorial's balance sheet was in a worse state. He assumed that the man was not only talking about him then. The main character approached the entrance to the cave. He decided that this did not concern him. Meanwhile, bloodstains appeared on the ground when the guy destroyed the knoll. A system sign appeared indicating a 0.001% increase in the completion of Heaven-Slaying Star. The monster tried to turn away from the player's attack, but it was destroyed, causing the completion of the Heaven-Slaying Star to be increased by 0.001%. The brunette, looking at his opponent, frowned deeply. A system sign appeared stating that the completion rate of Heaven-Slaying Star is 0.01%. Turning away, the guy walked away from the pile of dead monsters. He killed 10 gnolls, but his completion rate barely exceeded 0.01%. At this point, he assumed that he needed to kill creatures located higher in order to raise the level of his ability. The main character, holding the bag in his hands, began to scatter powder that muffled the smell. He understands that he did not come to this place because of hunting. Yuan, being in the cave, bowed and noticed that his body, from which the cold had gone, had recovered sufficiently, after which he decided that he had everything prepared. The guy's hand began to sparkle when he touched something. The brunette took out a red crystal, which is the giant's heart. He remembered that the manager asked to listen to him carefully. The gentleman in the red cloak brought the crystal, which was the giant's heart, to his mouth. He quickly took a bite of the item when he remembered that it needed to be consumed before completing the tutorial. The main character's heart began to beat loudly. His blood vessels were severely swollen. A system sign appeared indicating that the pure blood of a giant demon had been absorbed. Yuan suddenly grabbed his heart as the creature's blood began to enter his body. A warning appeared that a battle between a man and a giant and a demon was beginning in the brunette's body. The guy began to tremble all over his body when he felt that he was getting very hot. He grabbed the ground tightly with his hand when he realized that the fire spell robe was not even able to stop the fire inside his body. A system sign appeared stating that his fiery eyes began to resist the flames of the giant race. The main character, clutching his heart, fell to the ground with a roar. He assumed that his bones and muscles began to turn out and his blood began to flow in the opposite direction. The fiery eyes could not resist the flames of the giant race. Some creature approached the guy lying on the ground. He realized that there was no way to numb the pain, so he decided to endure it through willpower. At that moment, he realized that by enduring, he could gain the greatest strength. Yuan imagined an image of a man who told him that absorbing this item in the tutorial is tantamount to suicide. It was he who told him that the main character must first get fiery eyes, after which he said that if he could not do this, he should give up his heart. The main character remembered that he had only one chance. A strong aura began to emanate from his body as a sign appeared indicating that his strength would increase by 1 unit. The guy's stamina and strength again increased by 1 unit. A notification appeared about an increase in mana by 1 unit. Beads of sweat began to flow from the guy's face as his stamina increased by 1 unit. He wondered how much time had passed. Yuan's strength increased by 1 unit. The main character, trembling all over, tried to lean on his hand. He assumed that he should be getting better little by little. A system sign has appeared stating that fiery eyes conflict with the fire of the giant race, and also that the player is able to suppress it with the help of them. The brunette, trembling all over, knelt down. There was a notification that a gigantic fire had been received by satisfying the conditions of the hidden part. A devilish smile appeared on the guy's face. He did not understand what a giant fire was. At that moment, he realized that the skill that was supposed to appear was not arising. A strong aura began to emanate from Yuan, who was in the cave. He thought he would go crazy. Meanwhile, night fell in the dungeon. There are 707 hours, 54 minutes and 48 seconds left on the time limit board. The main character is sprawled on the ground in a cave. Drops of sweat began to flow from his angry face. He realized that a quarter of a day had already passed. The time limit notice began to blur in his vision. The guy assumed that he had done the wrong thing. At that moment, he remembered that initially this skill could be obtained after hunting 10,000 giants, whose blood it was necessary to wipe off. Lying on the ground, the brunette hit his cloak hard with his fist. He believes that skill does not come easily. Yuan clenched his hand tightly into a fist as he suggested that he should calm down. The guy loosened his grip. A system sign appears stating that the conditions of the hidden part have been met. Lying on the ground, the main character opened his mouth in surprise. His eyes glowed red as the pure blood of the giant and demon was completely absorbed into his body. A notification has appeared regarding the perfect absorption of a giant's heart in the tutorial area. Yuan began to lose consciousness when he realized that he had succeeded. A red aura began to emanate from the brunette in the cave. A system sign about receiving gigantization has appeared. A time limit board appeared with 696 hours, 18 minutes and 48 seconds remaining. Having stood up, the guy grabbed his head and realized that he had been lying there for about a quarter of a day. He remembered that he passed out twice in tutorial. The main character struggled to get to his feet because he decided that he should hurry up since the shortest history of clearing this tutorial is a week. He remembered the player who played a major role in achieving this shortest record. An image of a man appeared in Yuan's head, one of whose eyes was covered with a mask. He knows that Odin is the best gladiator and the leader of the enormous power of Asgard. Something began to appear in the guy's hand. He decided that he couldn't lose either. A table appeared with the rank of tutorial participants, with Hargon in first place. The brunette tilted his head to the side when he noticed that the pureblood was in first place, and also that the difference with other places was also overwhelming. He introduced a girl with a blue-eyed guy standing next to her. The main character knows that they are relatives who were born in the world of Pantemium, developed by magic and sword art. At that moment, he remembered that people from at least 2 worlds and more participated in the tutorial. An image of a brunette dressed in armor and being in second place in the ranking appeared in his head. He assumed that Yalch was a purebred he had never heard of. Yuan presented the image of some player whose name is Sunjeon. Looking at his name, the main character realized that he had absolutely no memory of the participant who came from the same world as him. The brunette turned his head to the side and suggested that these players could not climb the tower because they died at this stage. The gentleman in the red cloak touched his head and decided that his thoughts would not change anything. He believes that he needs to check his condition and quickly set out on the road, because even without this he was very late. A sign appeared stating that the main character, who is level 57, has 72 units of strength. He noticed that his strength and agility stats had increased significantly due to absorbing the giant's power, after which he decided that he should take care to maintain an even balance. He learned that the skill level of the giant fire ability is 0%. The brunette moved forward when he realized that his skill rank was not that high. He believes that if he didn't have the ability to attack, this skill would help him. Covering his face, Yuan climbed out of the cave. He tilted his head and thought about where he should go now. His eyes sparkled with a bright light. A notification about the Flaming Eyes skill has appeared. The main character quickly ran through the forest. Deep in the forest there was some kind of village. Orcs stood near the wooden structure. They looked intently at the guy who began to approach them. The monsters decided that this man would become their prey. The brunette confidently put his hand in front of him. He decided that the orc settlement would be suitable for him to test the giant fire skill. The entire settlement was covered in flames when Yuan used his ability. Green creatures with fangs, on fire, began to scream loudly. They assumed that they were attacked by that person. Attacking his opponents, the brunette pulled out a well-forged sword from his inventory. The orcs began to scatter when the main character attacked them. The gentleman in the red cloak cut the creature. Yuan was in 15,104th place in the ranking. His eyes glowed with a bright flame when he remembered that there were 6 days left. He decided that he could finish this tutorial faster than Odin. In second place in the ranking was the main character, who had 5266 points. Hargon frowned deeply when he suggested that it was the guy whose name he didn't know. A sly smile appeared on the blonde's face when he remembered that the main character had not shown up for a while, causing him to believe that he only had fast legs. At that moment, he realized that Yuan was climbing the rankings extremely actively. The player in golden armor looked back at his partner, who noticed that he was joyful. Hargon said that he definitely wants to bring some guy. The blonde guy wearing a green cape smiled and asked his partner if he was talking about Yuan. Sunjeon, being a member from the Earth World line, has excellent mana control. The blonde turned to the guy and asked him if he knew the main character. He, denying this, replied that they originated from the first country, after which he said that that player is very memorable after you see him in ranking. Hargon remembered the rating of the round and suggested that with such a speed of the protagonist, the top could change dramatically after some time. after which he called out to someone. The players stared at the pureblood standing in front of them. He reminded them that he had personally gathered them. The blonde raised his head and realized that he had created a pretty good team, in which the last place intended for Yuan was empty. The guys went after Hargon, who announced the start of the hunt. Meanwhile, a magic ball appeared in the participant's hand. He asked his uncle if this was what he wanted. Paladin, who was a mixture of a dark elf and a creature that hailed from Pantemium, moved his hand to the side and reported what he had found. Hearing this, the blonde menacingly replied that he was not an uncle. The players were standing around some kind of cliff when the head praised the guy and decided to take a look. Standing on the cliff, the pureblood began to use his magic. He advised his partner to move away so that they would not fall under his attack. Angry, Hargon clenched his hand tightly into a fist. Huge pieces of earth began to fly apart. A bead of sweat began to drip down Sunjun's face as he realized that it had taken him half a day to find the place. In the pit stood a player from whom a strong aura emanated. He asked the guys how much it would have taken to find her if Paladin had not helped them, after which he demanded that his partners come in. The men jumped into the cliff. The brunette suggested that they were in a fairly spacious cave. In the hand of the elf with gray braids, the magic ball continued to sparkle. He decided to move after looking around. Seeing his uncle's blue face, he asked him what was wrong with him. At that moment, Paladin realized that something strange was happening. The blonde frowned deeply when he realized that there was no response about the discovery of the dungeon. Hargon headed towards the cave entrance when he assumed that someone might have found it earlier. The guys started calling out to the captain. The pureblood looked back at a fair-haired guy who ran up to him and asked him to check ranking. Yuan was in first place in the tutorial rating. The blonde's pupils shrank with anger when he realized that the main character had overtaken him. Above Hargon, who was in second place, was Yuan. Meanwhile, the purple creature was broken into pieces. The blonde man attacked the caterpillars, which had green paws. Standing at the entrance to the dungeon, from which a bright light emanated, the heroine noticed that their leader was pretty angry. After that, she asked the guys who knows why he lost his temper. Someone suggested that an angry Hargon looks like he is brimming with determination. The latter tilted her head to the side and said it was because of the excitement of competition. A blush appeared on the guy's face when the brunette began to approach him. The girl believes that they will not have a good hunt because the captain single-handedly kills a huge number of monsters. Hearing this, Sunjun said that this could happen. Yalch, who is a purebird from the tower, closed her eyes when someone suggested dividing the team in half. The guys looked intently at the head, from whom a strong aura emanated. He informed them that in the cave the road forks into two directions, after which he said that in each team Alador and Paladin will be responsible for finding the road and communication. The players looked blankly at the head, who began to list them by name. He told them to go to the right and assumed that they would have no problem since Yalch was coming with them. Iron swords appeared in the brunette's hands. Raising her weapon, the long-haired girl announced that they would see each other later. A magic ball began to sparkle in the player's hand as he used the mana concentration skill. The earth began to fall apart when the guy directed his energy at it. The caterpillars raised their heads when the brunette decided to attack them from above. Yalch, closing her eyes, cut all the creatures. The guys were surrounded by the dead bodies of monsters. Sunjun began to flex his fingers when, standing behind him, his partner asked how many hours they had been hunting. The guy realized that he should save his mana because now he can use about 2 concentrations of energy. Seeing a wooden door in a cave, the man asked why it was so huge. His partner suggested that behind it there was a room with a boss. Alador looked intently at the door and asked the guys what the boss room was. Sunjun said something similar happened in a game he played before, after which he said that in the world in which he previously lived, he saw many similar things, behind which the bosses were usually located. The guys looked back at Yalch approaching them, who asked them not to get lost. She believes that the time of relaxation is the closest moment to death. A wide smile appeared on the blonde boy's face as he agreed with his partner. He curled his lips, frightened. The brunette turned her head to her worried partner and asked him what was the matter. Hearing this, the guy told her about ranking. The guys got scared when they heard some noise. The whole cave was covered in fog when the guy with the gun told the guys that this sound was coming from the door. The brunette demanded that they control their actions and asked Sunjun to take a position from behind. Standing near the slightly opened wooden door, the guy suggested that the recent shock and the first place points were definitely related. Purple mist appeared from the door as the player guessed what was there. There were bloodied body parts of the creature lying around inside the room when a notification appeared that the guys had entered the boss's dungeon. They stared blankly as a system sign appeared indicating the completion of the sweep. Sunjun, who had a green cape on his shoulders, frowned deeply when he remembered the main character. The reflection of a person appeared in his eyes. On the wall of the room towered the image of a player with bright flames emanating from his eyes. The guy realized that this was Yuan. The main character in a red cloak was standing on a killed monster when a notification appeared about the completion of the cleanup. The brunette's eyes glowed with a bright flame. He remembered how he cut the boss's body with a sword. A huge caterpillar with spikes fell to the ground with a roar. A weapon began to appear in his hand as he realized that the monster was terribly tenacious. A system has appeared about raising the level of the main character, thanks to which his stats increased by 1 unit. Standing near the killed monster, the guy realized that he had used all his skills and realized his current level of combat effectiveness. He decided that he should definitely use the giant's flame carefully, paying attention to his stamina stats. The brunette kicked the caterpillar when he received 3,000 points for clearing the boss room and saw that the completion of the heaven-slaying star increased by 1%. He realized that the rate of increase in completion is low because even with the killing of the boss it increases by 1%. The main character climbed onto the monster and realized that he should mostly kill bosses because he didn't want to farm an insane amount. He realized that he could not understand what degree effect this skill gave. The brunette looked intently into the distance and decided that he needed to further increase his completeness. While on the dead boss, Yuan told someone that they were a little late because the creature had already died. Alador frowned deeply when her partner, standing next to her, suggested that the guy was able to kill everyone. Sun Jun's face turned blue when he remembered that they recognized the captain as the strongest in tutorial. He realized that the main character was able to single-handedly take down the boss's room. There were traces of blood near the dead caterpillar. Seeing them, the guy thought about whether the person who came with him from the first world and went through the same tutorial really has the strongest skills. Approaching the killed body of the monster, the blonde player understood why the captain wanted this predator in his squad. He asked Yuan if he had any other companions. Hearing this, the brunette replied that he was one. A drop of sweat began to flow from Sun Jun's face when he decided that this member was necessary for their team because he was dangerous to them if he was not with them. He asked him if he wanted to join their team. Sitting on a caterpillar with spikes, the main character lowered his head and thought about whether that Korean's name was Sun Jun. The brunette looked somewhere in disbelief. Hargon's partners were standing in the boss's room. Yuan, seeing the small number of participants, assumed that their team had split up for a while to hunt. The brunette in armor lowered her gaze to the ground as the protagonist suggested that she was Yalch, who is in ranking after Hargon. He, realizing that the girl had reached the boss's room, assumed that she was not at tutorial level. The red cloak of the guy sitting on the tracks began to develop. He realized that the blonde had created a good team to work together because they had a great future ahead of them. Interrupting his thoughts, Sun Jun called his name. He, frowning heavily, said menacingly that he was refusing their offer. The blonde player standing behind the brunette was upset, although he understood that it would be so. Yalch asked him if he was going to defeat the Baraganda boss alone. Yuan squatted while the girl looking at him reminded him that he had allocated a month for this tutorial. She believes that the round is set up so that they won't have any problems even if they kill the boss with a majority. The heroine introduced the participants who were fighting and talked about how the essence of this latest tutorial is teamwork. She thinks that the player should grow and gather many allies in order to combine their powers within the allotted time. Yuan looked at his interlocutor with displeasure. Pieces of stones began to fly into the dungeon when the master realized what they wanted. The girl with white hair folded her hands and said that she would contact the captain so that he would come because they were able to detect the main character. Hearing this, Sun Jun assumed that it would become much noisier with his arrival. A bright yellow light appeared in the boss's room. Hargon jumped high when he saw Yuan sitting on the monster. He started calling him by name. The blonde approached the main character. The player became very angry when the brunette pressed his forehead with all his strength. The guy pinned the captain to the ground. Sun Jun bared his teeth and looked at what was happening. Yalch frowned deeply with displeasure. The red-haired guy standing behind his partner looked intently forward. Yuan wanted to touch the blonde with his hand and asked them if they wanted to survive. The brunette tightly grabbed the handles of their weapons when the main character asked them if they planned to become rankers. Hearing this, Yalch thought about how a person, even someone who is not a pureblood, knows about them. The brunette became sad when he remembered the tower and the fact that Rankers was a creature that had overcome all the challenges and cleared all the floors. He knows that it has the power to enjoy power, glory, and eternal life. The guy raised his head and, apologizing, said that he was not interested in such a thing. He understands that someday he will have to become one, but this is just the first of the stages. The heroine grabbed the hilt of the sword tightly. She bared her teeth in anger and remembered that for people like her, who are not chosen by the tower, this was a distant dream. She knows that her king, the leader of the clan, is the ranker that everyone sincerely desires to become. At this moment she asked the main character how he differs from them. The brunette looked down intently as Yalch asked him if he was going to become a top ranker. He raised his hand up and admitted that he planned to become someone higher than them. The guys looked intently at the guy sitting on the monster, whose final goal is not some kind of tower top. He said that he wanted to break through the ceiling of this tower. Sun Jun, standing near his teammates, looked at Yuan with concern. The brunette asked the gentleman what nonsense he was saying. The gold-armored player slammed his hand onto the ground with all his might. He called the main character by name. Hargon grabbed his head and asked the brunette what he was doing. Angry, the blonde approached the player, who told him that when he saw his attack, he thought that they wanted to kill him. The man answered menacingly that he just wanted to grab him. A drop of sweat began to run down the guy's face. Yuan said that he could only get scared when such a strong man flew at him. Yalch exhaled heavily as the brunette apologized to their captain. Sun Jun didn't expect that the main character was convinced by this. Hargon started dusting off his hands and said that Yuan's speech about breaking through the ceiling was very insightful. He, remembering his father's words, said that a powerful force was hidden outside the tower. The main character lowered his head when the blonde informed him that his father was an incredibly great man. Hearing this, he wondered what he was talking about Zeus, who holds the position of King of Olympus. The brunette leaned dissatisfied on his arm when the blonde asked if he again refused to join their team. Hargon believes that a sardine cannot swim with a whale. Putting his hand aside, the blonde guy demanded that he not be considered some kind of sardine, because he would someday become the King of Olympus. Sun Jun, standing near the heroines, called out to the captain. A sly smile appeared on the guy's face when he realized that the blonde man who claimed the direct bloodline of Olympus had great ambitions. At that moment, Hargon said that he could prove if he did not believe him. The guy represented a huge number of players when he invited Yuan to bet on which of them, having contributed more, could kill the boss. He told the main character that he could create a team at his own discretion, after which he said that in any case his team would not have more than 9 people.